The northwestern subcontinent of South Asia, encompassing regions of present-day Pakistan and northwestern India, presents a landscape that shaped early human habitation in profound ways. Between the late Pleistocene and early Holocene, roughly 12,000 to 7,000 years ago, this area experienced a series of climatic and environmental transformations that directly influenced patterns of settlement and subsistence. Prior to the emergence of complex societies, the terrain consisted of riverine plains interspersed with low hills and seasonal floodplains, punctuated by scattered freshwater sources. Archaeological surveys indicate that these areas supported small groups of hunter-gatherers who exploited wild cereals, legumes, and fauna, including gazelle, wild cattle, and aquatic species. These communities were largely mobile, relocating according to resource availability, yet they displayed early signs of experimentation with plant and animal domestication. Evidence from lithic assemblages demonstrates technological continuity, showing a gradual refinement of stone tools adapted to hunting, processing, and basic construction tasks. The combination of resource richness and environmental challenges fostered adaptive strategies that became critical for sedentism. During this period, the river systems of the region, including the upper courses of the Indus and Ghaggar-Hakra, provided both sustenance and transport corridors. Sediment cores and paleoclimatic data reveal fluctuating monsoon intensity, which created periods of both abundance and scarcity. During stronger monsoons, seasonal flooding deposited nutrient-rich silt on floodplains, creating favorable conditions for early cultivation. Conversely, drier periods required mobility and careful exploitation of available resources. These alternating cycles encouraged experimentation with plant management and the storage of surplus foods, laying a foundation for more permanent settlements. Archaeological findings from sites such as Mehrgarh, located in Balochistan, demonstrate how early communities gradually shifted from simple foraging to a combination of foraging and incipient agriculture. Around 7000 BCE, Mehrgarh inhabitants began cultivating barley and wheat, while domesticating goats and sheep. These developments did not represent a complete break from hunting, but rather an incremental intensification of food production strategies. Over the next several centuries, settlements became increasingly fixed, with mud brick structures replacing temporary shelters and evidence of early storage facilities indicating emerging social organization. This period also saw the development of specialized material culture that reflects both adaptation and innovation. Bone tools, terracotta figurines, and early pottery from Mehrgarh suggest experimentation with new technologies and symbolic practices. The presence of painted motifs and standardized shapes implies the emergence of shared cultural norms across neighboring communities. Archaeologists interpret these artifacts as indicators of social learning and communication, demonstrating that ideas, techniques, and cultural markers circulated among groups before the rise of urban centers. The refinement of tool-making techniques further allowed communities to expand subsistence strategies beyond immediate local resources, enabling the exploitation of new ecological niches. Additionally, evidence of early dentistry practices, such as drilled teeth found in Mehrgarh burials, illustrates a surprising level of technical skill and understanding of human anatomy for the period. These early innovations indicate that even small, non-urban populations possessed capacities for problem-solving and technological adaptation that would later support more complex societies. Settlement patterns during this formative phase were influenced not only by environmental factors, but also by social dynamics. Archaeological data suggests that small groups were connected through exchange networks, sharing tools, ornamentation, and other material goods. While these networks were limited in scale, they established early precedents for intercommunity cooperation and communication. Over time, these connections facilitated the transmission of agricultural knowledge, craft techniques, and cultural practices, helping to homogenize certain aspects of daily life across the region. The development of early social hierarchies is inferred from variations in burial practices and the differential distribution of goods within dwellings, though such stratification was minimal compared to later urban societies. Importantly, these early communities operated without centralized authority, suggesting that coordination and organization were managed through informal social norms and kin-based structures. This approach allowed for resilience in the face of environmental variability and laid the groundwork for more formalized governance in subsequent phases. Ecologically, the northwestern subcontinent provided a unique combination of resources and challenges that facilitated human innovation. Seasonal flooding replenished soils, while adjacent uplands offered stone, wood, and other raw materials necessary for tool production and construction. Archaeological surveys indicate that communities strategically located themselves to balance access to arable land, water, and raw materials, demonstrating an early understanding of landscape management. The gradual adoption of sedentary life allowed for the development of infrastructure such as storage pits, hearths, and communal areas. These structures not only supported survival, but also enabled more complex social interactions, including cooperative labor for construction and maintenance tasks. By organizing labor for these early projects, these communities inadvertently created the foundations of administrative systems that would later characterize urban centers. Over time, the benefits of a sedentary lifestyle became increasingly apparent, as permanent dwellings reduced energy expenditure associated with mobility and allowed for greater investment in food production, craft specialization, and social cohesion. The cumulative effect of environmental stability, agricultural experimentation, technological innovation, and nascent social organization during this early period established the essential conditions for more densely populated settlements. Archaeological evidence from Mehrgarh demonstrates that these communities achieved a level of self-sufficiency and resilience that enabled them to withstand periods of climatic fluctuation while continuing to develop culturally and technologically. The integration of plant and animal domestication, combined with material culture standardization and emerging social networks, illustrates a trajectory of increasing complexity. This trajectory directly influenced subsequent settlement patterns, technological adoption, and societal structuring in the Indus region. Furthermore, the ability to manage resources collectively, maintain consistent habitation, and share knowledge across communities marked a critical evolutionary step in human history. Over the next centuries, these early villages expanded in size, density, and connectivity, forming proto-urban clusters that would eventually give rise to the Indus Valley Civilization. The lessons learned during this foundational period, strategic settlement placement, experimental agriculture, resource management, and coordinated social organization, provided the ecological, technological, and social infrastructure necessary for the emergence of larger, permanent communities. The adaptive strategies, cooperative practices, and innovations developed by these early inhabitants laid a durable foundation upon which the complexity of urban centers could be constructed. The gradual stabilization of food production, the spread of material culture, and the establishment of intercommunity exchange networks created conditions in which settlements could coalesce, setting the stage for the development of formalized governance, specialized craft production, and increasingly intricate cultural practices in the centuries that followed. These early communities, though small and often overlooked in later historical narratives, were instrumental in shaping the trajectory of civilization in South Asia. This evolutionary phase, characterized by environmental adaptation, technological innovation, and social experimentation, represents the critical first step in the long arc of Indus development. By the conclusion of this period, communities had transitioned from mobile foragers to increasingly sedentary agriculturalists capable of sustaining larger populations, coordinating labor, and transmitting knowledge across generations. These advances set the foundation for the next stage of civilization, in which small, scattered settlements began integrating into larger networks of villages, experimenting with proto-urban structures, and creating the first standardized cultural practices that would define the Indus Valley in the millennia to come. The transition from scattered, adaptive communities to interconnected, semi-permanent villages marked a decisive progression toward the complexity and scale that would characterize early urban life in the Indus region. The site of Mehrgarh, situated in the Kachi plain of modern-day Balochistan, represents one of the earliest and most significant examples of sustained agricultural experimentation in South Asia, spanning from approximately 700 to 5500 BCE. This settlement illustrates a critical transition from mobile foraging to an increasingly sedentary way of life. Archaeological excavations reveal that the inhabitants of Mehrgar engaged in systematic cultivation of wheat and barley, representing some of the earliest known domesticated cereal agriculture in the region. Alongside plant cultivation, the domestication of animals, including goats, sheep, and cattle, provided reliable sources of protein, milk, and hides. These developments did not occur in isolation. They reflect a gradual intensification of subsistence strategies shaped by environmental opportunities and constraints, particularly the region's variable monsoon patterns and fertile river-adjacent soils. The combination of cereal farming and animal husbandry allowed communities to maintain year-round settlements and generate surplus, thereby facilitating population growth and more complex social interactions. Residential architecture at Mehrgar evolved in parallel with subsistence strategies. Early dwellings were simple, single-room mud brick structures designed to accommodate small family units. Over time, multi-roomed houses emerged, often with distinct spaces for food storage, domestic activities, and craft production. Excavations indicate that grain storage facilities were a prominent feature, suggesting that surplus accumulation became a central concern. The presence of granaries and specialized storage pits allowed the inhabitants to regulate food supply in response to seasonal fluctuations, providing stability and predictability in daily life. This, in turn, enabled greater investment in other areas, including tool production, ornamentation, and ritual practices. Standardization of building materials and architectural techniques across the site suggests coordinated planning and the transmission of construction knowledge among households. Such developments mark an early form of social organization, where communal knowledge and resource management were essential for sustaining sedentary life. Craft specialization and material culture at Mehrgar also reflect the community's increasing complexity. Excavations reveal workshops producing tools from bone, stone, and early metals, as well as beads and ornaments made from semi-precious stones, shells, and terracotta. Pottery evolved from simple, utilitarian forms to elaborately shaped and painted vessels, displaying a level of aesthetic awareness alongside functional utility. This standardization indicates that craft knowledge was disseminated within the community and likely regulated by social norms or emerging leadership structures. An intriguing aspect of Mehrgar's material culture is evidence of early dentistry. Human remains show drilled teeth, executed with techniques that required precision and specialized knowledge, revealing an advanced understanding of anatomy and tool use. These technological and cultural innovations demonstrate that Mehrgar's inhabitants were capable of both experimentation and adaptation, developing solutions to meet practical, social, and health-related needs. Agricultural practices at Mehrgar also had wider implications for societal development. The reliable production of food surpluses allowed for population aggregation and the formation of dense clusters of households. These clusters facilitated the transmission of knowledge and skills, the establishment of trade networks for surplus goods, and the emergence of proto-specializations within the community. Evidence of traded items, including marine shells and semi-precious stones, indicates that Mehrgar was already participating in broader regional exchange networks. Such trade not only supplied raw materials unavailable locally, but also promoted cultural interaction, contributing to the diffusion of technological innovations and artistic motifs. This early economic interconnectivity provided a framework that would later support the complex trade systems of the mature Indus civilization. The integration of domesticated animals into agricultural practice represents another critical aspect of Mehrgar's social and economic development. Cattle and goats were used for multiple purposes, including milk, labor, hides, and ritual activity. Faunal remains indicate careful breeding and selective culling practices, suggesting that inhabitants understood the long-term benefits of maintaining healthy herds. The combination of plant and animal domestication increased the community's resilience against environmental variability, ensuring that food production could continue even during periods of reduced rainfall or other climatic stressors. This adaptive strategy highlights the interdependence between environmental management, technological innovation, and social coordination. Over time, such strategies created a stable foundation upon which more complex economic, social, and administrative structures could emerge. In addition to subsistence and craft development, Murgar provides significant insight into social organization and ritual practice. Burial sites indicate that individuals were interred with varying quantities of goods, including beads, tools, and ornaments, suggesting differential social status or specialized roles within the community. The presence of figurines, possibly representing deities, fertility symbols, or social markers, points to an emerging symbolic culture and shared belief system. These practices demonstrate that Murgar was not only a center for economic innovation, but also a site where social norms, ritual activities, and communal identity were actively maintained and transmitted. The integration of ritual, daily labor, and craft production indicates that social cohesion and cultural continuity were central to the community's success. Environmental management played a critical role in the sustainability of Murgar. The inhabitants understood the importance of proximity to water sources, fertile soils, and raw material deposits. They strategically placed dwellings, granaries, and workshops to maximize access while minimizing risk from seasonal flooding. Early evidence of irrigation channels and field boundary markers suggests experimentation with water management and crop organization. By organizing labor for irrigation and field maintenance, the community inadvertently developed one of the earliest forms of administrative coordination, laying the groundwork for more formalized governance structures that would later characterize urban Indus settlements. The combination of agricultural intensification, technological innovation, and strategic environmental planning demonstrates that Murgar's success was dependent on an integrated understanding of ecology, economy, and society. Over the course of nearly 2 millennia, Murgar evolved from small, semi-nomadic settlements to a complex, relatively dense village capable of sustaining a growing population. Its inhabitants developed reliable agricultural systems, craft specialization, proto-administrative coordination, and enduring cultural practices. The lessons learned at Murgar, particularly regarding resource management, social cohesion, and technological experimentation, directly influenced later settlement patterns across the Indus region. These innovations enabled the emergence of interconnected village networks, providing a social, economic, and ecological framework upon which proto-urban and, eventually, urban centers could be established. By establishing the viability of sedentary agricultural life and demonstrating the potential of coordinated communal effort, Murgar set the stage for the emergence of the Indus Valley Civilization as one of the earliest complex societies in human history. The systematic experimentation with agriculture, domestic animal management, material culture, and social organization at Murgar illustrates a decisive step in the long-term trajectory of the Indus region. By the conclusion of this phase, inhabitants had achieved the technological, ecological, and social competencies required for more ambitious settlement patterns. The community's successes in food production, craft specialization, trade, and ritual organization represent an essential foundation for the expansion of village networks that would culminate in the urban and administrative complexity of the mature Harappan cities. These developments demonstrate that the transition from Neolithic villages to proto-urban settlements was gradual, evidence-based, and rooted in adaptive strategies that ensured long-term viability. The progression from Murgar to regional village clusters underscores the importance of both environmental opportunity and social innovation. As knowledge, technology, and cultural practices spread through interlinked communities, these early agricultural experiments catalyzed broader demographic growth, technological dissemination, and economic specialization. This cumulative evolution directly enabled the formation of more extensive, semi-urban settlements and set the framework for emergent social hierarchies, coordinated labor systems, and cultural standardization observed in subsequent Chalcolithic phases. In this manner, Murgar served not only as a local center of early agricultural experimentation, but also as a foundational node within a larger network that would eventually coalesce into the proto-urban landscapes of the Indus Valley, demonstrating the intricate interplay between environment, innovation, and human organization. Between approximately 5,500 and 4,000 BCE, the northwestern subcontinent of South Asia experienced a period of relative climatic stability that profoundly influenced human settlement patterns and societal development. Paleoclimatic studies indicate that monsoon systems became more predictable during this interval, providing consistent rainfall that replenished river systems, improved soil fertility, and stabilized agricultural yields. These conditions allowed early farming communities, such as those at Murgar, to consolidate permanent dwellings, expand cultivated areas, and support growing populations. The resulting ecological reliability enabled communities to establish interlinked clusters of settlements across the Baluchistan Plateau and adjacent Indus Plains. Archaeological surveys reveal that these proto-village networks were spatially organized to optimize access to water, arable land, and raw materials, including stone, timber, and semi-precious minerals. Over time, these settlements became increasingly interconnected, forming a regional pattern of cultural and technological exchange that foreshadowed later urbanization. The evidence from this period demonstrates that early villagers began experimenting with more complex forms of social and economic organization. Pottery styles evolved in both form and decoration, reflecting not only utilitarian needs, but also shared aesthetic norms across multiple sites. Standardized shapes, motifs, and firing techniques indicate the dissemination of technological knowledge and cultural practices over considerable distances. Bone and stone tool assemblages reveal specialization, suggesting that certain households or groups focused on producing specific types of implements, beads, or ornaments. These practices imply an early division of labor and coordination within and between settlements. Moreover, the appearance of early storage structures, such as granaries and pits, across multiple communities reflects the management of surplus, a necessary condition for supporting higher population densities and more complex social hierarchies. The cumulative effect of these innovations was the gradual transformation of scattered villages into proto-urban networks capable of supporting coordinated economic activity and shared cultural identity. Trade and intercommunity exchange played an increasingly prominent role during this period. Archaeological findings suggest that villages within the Baluchistan and Indus Plains engaged in the movement of raw materials, finished goods, and cultural artifacts. Marine shells, semi-precious stones, and copper were transported across considerable distances, indicating both the emergence of exchange networks and the capacity to organize procurement and distribution over extended areas. This nascent trade was accompanied by the standardization of weights, measures, and possibly symbolic markers, suggesting that early communities understood the importance of regulating economic interactions to ensure fairness and efficiency. Such measures were critical for the integration of dispersed settlements, allowing for coordinated agricultural planning, craft production, and social cohesion. By linking villages in mutually beneficial networks, early societies laid the foundation for regional cultural unification, which would later support the rise of large urban centers. Material culture and technological advances also reflect the increasing complexity of these proto-village networks. Pottery continued to diversify, with new forms suited to storage, cooking, and ritual functions. Terracotta figurines and small symbolic artifacts suggest the persistence of shared belief systems and the reinforcement of community identity. Tool production became more refined, with specialized flint, bone, and copper implements serving agricultural, domestic, and craft needs. This technological refinement indicates not only experimentation, but also the ability to transmit knowledge across generations and settlements. An important insight from this period is that technological innovation was closely linked to social coordination. Improvements in tools and craft processes were sustained by networks of knowledge exchange, demonstrating that communal learning and cooperation were central to societal development. Settlement patterns during this era reveal significant demographic growth and increased social density. Villages were organized in ways that balanced proximity to water, arable land, and resources with the need for communal spaces and defense against environmental hazards. The spatial arrangement of dwellings, granaries, and craft workshops suggests deliberate planning, with attention to functionality and coordination among households. This emerging settlement hierarchy was likely managed through informal social norms and kin-based leadership rather than centralized authority, reflecting adaptive governance mechanisms suited to growing populations. Archaeological evidence of shared public spaces, such as communal hearths and work areas, reinforces the conclusion that cooperation and collective decision-making were central to societal stability. Such structures allowed communities to maintain cohesion, manage labor for construction and cultivation, and coordinate economic activities, forming the precursors to formal administrative systems. The stability of climate and the resulting agricultural reliability also fostered cultural continuity and inter-community identity. As villages became more densely populated and interconnected, material culture, craft traditions, and symbolic practices began to standardize across regions. Bead-making techniques, pottery motifs, and architectural styles were shared across multiple settlements, reinforcing a sense of shared cultural identity. Simultaneously, localized variations persisted, demonstrating adaptive responses to specific environmental conditions and resource availability. This balance between regional standardization and local variation illustrates a dynamic process of cultural evolution, where early societies learned to negotiate identity, resource management, and technological innovation. These patterns directly influenced the development of the larger urban systems that would emerge in the subsequent Khat Diji and mature Harappan phases. Demographic expansion during this period also had social implications. Increased population density required mechanisms for coordinating labor, resolving conflicts, and managing resources. While evidence of formal leadership is limited, burial practices, settlement organization, and communal construction suggest that emergent forms of social hierarchy and collaborative governance were present. Such structures were critical for maintaining order within increasingly complex village networks. Furthermore, the accumulation of surplus goods enabled households to invest in non-subsistence activities, including craft production, ritual practice, and inter-community trade. These activities reinforced social cohesion and facilitated knowledge transmission, allowing villages to sustain growth and resilience in the face of environmental variability. The cumulative developments of this period, climatic stability, agricultural intensification, craft specialization, demographic expansion, and inter-community exchange, provided the ecological, technological, and social infrastructure necessary for more complex forms of settlement. By experimenting with coordinated resource management, technological refinement, and social organization, early communities created conditions conducive to the emergence of proto-urban centers. These networks were not yet fully urbanized, but they demonstrate a clear trajectory toward increasing complexity, regional integration, and standardized cultural practices. Importantly, the processes established during this phase would enable communities to adapt to both environmental and social challenges, creating a resilient foundation for the urbanization and administrative innovations characteristic of later Indus civilization settlements. Over time, the combination of environmental opportunity and social innovation allowed villages to consolidate into interconnected clusters, sharing agricultural surplus, craft expertise, and symbolic systems. These proto-urban networks illustrate that urbanization in the Indus Valley was preceded by a long period of incremental growth and adaptation. The standardization of material culture, the coordination of labor for construction and agriculture, and the emergence of inter-village exchange networks set the stage for the first experiments in urban planning, fortification, and administrative oversight. This period of village network development represents a critical bridge between the early sedentary agricultural communities of Murgar and the proto-urban Khat Diji settlements, highlighting the continuity of technological, social, and ecological strategies that would underpin the subsequent phases of the Indus Valley Civilization. In conclusion, the period from 5500 to 4000 BCE demonstrates how stable climate, environmental management, and inter-community cooperation facilitated the rise of densely populated village networks. These networks exhibited increasing specialization, social coordination, and cultural standardization, which collectively created the preconditions for the first urban centers. The lessons learned from coordinated agriculture, craft production, and resource management enabled these early communities to sustain population growth, maintain cultural cohesion, and engage in emerging trade networks. This stage represents the critical evolutionary step that bridged small, self-sufficient villages with the more complex proto-urban societies of the Khat-Diji phase, setting the trajectory for the eventual emergence of the mature Harappan cities. The transition from the Neolithic to the Chalcolithic period in the northwestern subcontinent, beginning around 4000 BCE, marks a decisive transformation in settlement patterns, technology, and social organization. This era represents the shift from small, agriculturally based villages to larger, more complex communities exhibiting early forms of urban planning, specialized craft production, and proto-administrative structures. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Murgar, Omri, and Raymondari illustrates that communities increasingly relied on a combination of cereal agriculture, pastoralism, and emerging metallurgical practices to support growing populations. The term Chalcolithic itself reflects the introduction of copper into toolkits, signifying the earliest steps toward metal use alongside traditional stone implements. This technological adoption was incremental, with copper initially used for ornaments and small utilitarian objects before its application expanded to tools, weapons, and agricultural implements. Such innovations indicate both experimentation and a capacity for knowledge transmission within and between communities. During this period, settlement layouts became more structured, reflecting deliberate planning to accommodate demographic growth, social interaction, and economic activity. Houses were larger, often multi-roomed, and constructed with mud bricks or a combination of mud and stone. Streets and pathways reveal early spatial organization that facilitated movement, resource distribution, and access to communal areas. Some settlements display evidence of elevated platforms, possibly serving as administrative or ritual centers, while other areas were designated for specialized craft production, storage, or animal husbandry. This division of space suggests an increasing awareness of functional zoning, an essential precursor to later urban development. The systematic organization of dwellings, workshops, and communal spaces indicates that communities were developing mechanisms to manage labor, coordinate resource allocation, and maintain social cohesion. Craft specialization intensified during the Chalcolithic period. Workshops producing beads, pottery, and metal artifacts are present at multiple sites, reflecting both local consumption and participation in broader trade networks. Pottery evolved in form, function, and decoration, including painted motifs, burnished surfaces, and standardized vessel shapes. Beadmaking became increasingly sophisticated, with evidence of semi-precious stones such as carnelian and turquoise being transformed into uniform ornaments. Copper tools and implements, though limited in quantity, suggest experimentation with metallurgy and an understanding of the properties of metals for specific tasks. These developments demonstrate that technology and craft knowledge were shared and disseminated across communities, reinforcing cultural cohesion and enabling more efficient resource utilization. The cumulative effect was the emergence of communities capable of sustaining larger populations while supporting specialized labor divisions, a key indicator of social complexity. Agriculture continued to underpin Chalcolithic societies, with cereal crops such as barley and wheat forming the staple diet. Evidence of irrigation channels, field boundary markers, and storage pits indicates that agricultural production was increasingly managed and coordinated at the community level. Livestock remained central to subsistence, providing milk, meat, hides, and draft power for agricultural tasks. Faunal remains demonstrate selective breeding practices, indicating an awareness of herd management to optimize productivity. The integration of crop cultivation and animal husbandry created resilient subsistence systems capable of supporting denser settlements, while surplus production facilitated trade and craft specialization. Over time, these strategies allowed communities to adapt to environmental fluctuations and increasing population pressures, demonstrating an early form of integrated resource management that would characterize later urban societies. The Chalcolithic period also saw the emergence of proto-administrative practices. Standardized weights, measures, and seals appear in multiple settlements, suggesting coordinated economic regulation and record-keeping. While no written texts have yet been definitively associated with this phase, the material culture indicates that early forms of bureaucratic oversight were being tested. Such practices would have facilitated the management of surplus goods, the organization of labor for construction and agriculture, and the regulation of trade within and between settlements. The presence of similar architectural and craft standards across multiple sites implies that knowledge transfer and communication networks were increasingly sophisticated. Communities were able to implement systems of governance that balanced local autonomy with broader coordination, creating conditions conducive to the eventual emergence of centralized urban centers. Trade and interaction networks expanded significantly during this transitional phase. Evidence of long-distance exchange includes the movement of semi-precious stones, marine shells, and copper across hundreds of kilometers. These goods were not only economically valuable, but also served as markers of social status, ritual practice, and cultural identity. The distribution of standardized weights and seal impressions further suggests that economic exchanges were regulated and consistent, enabling trust and predictability in interactions between geographically distant communities. Participation in these networks encouraged the diffusion of technological innovations, artistic motifs, and cultural practices, promoting regional cohesion and facilitating the emergence of proto-urban cultural norms. These interactions were essential for the development of complex settlement patterns and early forms of intercommunity governance. Social organization during the Chalcolithic period reflects increasing complexity and stratification, though it remained less formalized than in later urban societies. Archaeological evidence from burial sites suggests variation in grave goods, indicating differential social roles or status distinctions. House sizes and layouts demonstrate emerging hierarchies, with larger multi-room dwellings likely accommodating extended families or individuals with specialized functions. Community coordination was necessary to manage agricultural production, craft workshops, and trade activities, implying that informal leadership structures or councils may have been in place to maintain order and allocate resources. Social cohesion was reinforced through shared material culture, ritual practices, and participation in economic networks, laying the groundwork for the formal administrative and governance systems characteristic of mature Harappan cities. The introduction and experimental use of copper represents an important technological milestone of the Chalcolithic period. Copper was initially limited to ornaments and small functional tools, reflecting careful experimentation and adaptation to new materials. Over time, communities refined techniques for smelting, shaping, and alloying, setting the stage for more extensive metallurgical practices in later periods. The adoption of metal tools and ornaments enhanced agricultural efficiency, craft production, and social signaling. This incremental approach demonstrates that technological innovation was closely linked to societal capacity for coordination, knowledge transfer, and adaptation to changing ecological and economic conditions. The combination of metallurgy, standardized material culture, and agricultural intensification underscores the Chalcolithic as a period of experimentation that directly enabled the emergence of urban complexity. Settlement growth and spatial organization during this period reveal the gradual formation of proto-urban networks. Sites such as Kot Diji, Omri, and Raymond Derry display evidence of fortification walls, elevated platforms, and functional zoning, indicating that communities were preparing for larger population centers and increased social complexity. These layouts reflect the early understanding of urban principles, including defense, drainage, and efficient circulation of goods and labor. While still village-based, these communities demonstrate continuity from Neolithic practices, enhanced by innovations in construction, metallurgy, and economic regulation. By concentrating populations and organizing functional spaces, these settlements set the stage for the emergence of more fully developed urban centers characteristic of the mature Harappan phase. In addition to technological and economic innovations, cultural developments continued to strengthen communal identity and social cohesion. Pottery styles, ornamentation, and ritual artifacts demonstrate shared aesthetic norms and symbolic practices. Figurines and ritual installations suggest the continuation of fertility, domestic, and community-oriented rites, reflecting the integration of material culture, social norms, and belief systems. Such practices provided continuity across generations and reinforced cultural identity within and between settlements. This integration of social, technological, and economic systems illustrates the multidimensional nature of Chalcolithic communities, preparing the foundation for coordinated administration, specialized labor, and urban planning that would define later Indus cities. By the end of the Chalcolithic period, communities in the northwestern subcontinent had successfully navigated the transition from small, agriculturally based villages to more complex, organized settlements. The integration of copper technology, craft specialization, coordinated agriculture, trade networks, and emerging social structures created a durable foundation for proto-urban development. These innovations facilitated population growth, increased inter-community connectivity, and standardized cultural practices. Crucially, the Chalcolithic period demonstrates that urbanization was not a sudden phenomenon, but rather the result of incremental adaptations in technology, social coordination, and resource management over several centuries. This phase directly set the stage for the rise of the Khat Diji culture in the early Harappan period, in which settlements would consolidate into larger urban centers with fortified structures, standardized material culture, and more formalized administrative mechanisms. The cumulative innovations in craft, agriculture, trade, and social organization during the Chalcolithic period provided the essential infrastructure for these developments, illustrating how adaptive experimentation, technological refinement, and social coordination facilitated the emergence of one of the world's earliest urban civilizations. The knowledge, skills, and organizational principles established in this transitional phase underpin the complexity and resilience observed in the mature Harappan cities that would dominate the Indus landscape over the next millennium. The emergence of fortified settlements during the early Harappan period, particularly exemplified by the Khat Diji culture, circa 3300 to 2600 BCE, represents a significant stage in the urbanization process of the Indus Valley region. Khat Diji sites, located primarily in the lower Indus Basin and upper Sindh region, exhibit evidence of structured settlement planning, defensive architecture, and specialized craft production, signaling a transition from loosely organized villages to more complex proto-urban centers. Archaeological surveys indicate that these settlements were strategically positioned along riverine terraces and elevated floodplains, balancing access to water and fertile land with the need for defense against environmental hazards and potential inter-community conflict. The introduction of fortification walls, platforms, and clearly delineated residential and craft zones reflects a deliberate approach to urban organization, demonstrating the community's growing capacity for planning, labor coordination, and resource management. Fortification strategies at Khat Diji involve the construction of mud brick walls, often reinforced with bastions and elevated platforms, which serve both defensive and symbolic functions. These structures suggest an awareness of potential conflict or social competition, as well as the emergence of collective identity and centralized authority capable of organizing large-scale construction projects. The labor and resources required to build and maintain these walls imply coordinated leadership, likely in the form of councils, elders, or proto-administrative officials, overseeing both social and economic activities. Excavations reveal internal divisions within settlements, including residential clusters, communal spaces, granaries, and craft workshops, demonstrating functional zoning designed to facilitate daily life, trade, and production efficiency. Such organization underscores the growing complexity of social structures during this period. Material culture from Khat Diji settlements exhibits both continuity with earlier Chalcolithic practices and notable innovations. Pottery production evolved with standardized forms, burnished surfaces, and painted motifs, reflecting shared aesthetic norms and functional requirements across multiple sites. Tools and ornaments made from copper, stone, and semi-precious materials indicate an increase in craft specialization, while evidence of bead-making workshops and small-scale metallurgical facilities demonstrates the community's participation in regional trade networks. Standardized weights and measures suggest the emergence of early economic regulation, facilitating the distribution of surplus goods and the management of craft production. These technological and economic innovations reveal a growing capacity for coordinated labor, knowledge transfer, and long-distance exchange, establishing foundational systems for later urban administration. Agricultural practices in Kot Diji settlements continued to provide the economic basis for societal expansion. Cereal cultivation, particularly wheat and barley, was supplemented by the management of domesticated animals such as cattle, sheep, and goats. Excavations reveal storage pits and granaries capable of maintaining surplus, enabling the support of larger populations and specialization of labor. Irrigation channels and field boundary markers suggest deliberate landscape management, ensuring consistent crop yields and resource stability. The integration of agriculture with craft production and trade networks illustrates the interdependence of economic, technological, and social systems, enabling communities to thrive in the face of environmental variability and increasing population density. This coordination of production, storage, and distribution represents an early form of resource management essential for urbanization. The spatial organization of Kot Diji settlements reflects early principles of urban planning. Residences were arranged to optimize access to communal spaces, workshops, and storage facilities, while streets and pathways facilitated movement and communication within the community. Elevated platforms and central areas may have served administrative, ritual, or assembly functions, suggesting the emergence of centralized coordination for social, economic, and possibly religious activities. Burial practices indicate differential treatment of individuals, including variations in grave goods, reflecting emerging social hierarchies and specialized roles. Together, these features demonstrate that Kot Diji settlements were not merely larger villages, but rather carefully organized communities capable of managing population growth, labor division, and social cohesion. Trade and inter-community exchange became increasingly sophisticated during the Kot Diji phase. Archaeological evidence demonstrates the movement of semi-precious stones, marine shells, copper, and finished craft goods across significant distances, connecting settlements in the lower Indus Valley with regions of Baluchistan, Gujarat, and the Iranian Plateau. Standardized weights and measures, combined with the distribution of uniform pottery and seals, indicate that these exchanges were coordinated and regulated, facilitating trust and efficiency. Participation in these trade networks promoted the dissemination of technological innovations, artistic motifs, and cultural practices, strengthening regional cohesion and contributing to the homogenization of material culture. Such interaction networks were essential precursors to the complex trade systems observed in mature Harappan cities. The integration of technology, agriculture, and social organization at Kot Diji illustrates the emergence of proto-administrative practices. The coordination of labor for fortifications, craft production, and agricultural management required planning, communication, and decision-making mechanisms. Standardized material culture, coupled with evidence of storage and surplus management, suggests that early systems of economic regulation were being implemented. These practices allowed communities to manage resources effectively, coordinate activities across multiple households, and maintain social order, providing a structural foundation for the formalized governance that would characterize later Indus urban centers. Cultural and ritual practices in Kot Diji settlements further strengthened community identity and social cohesion. Figurines, terracotta artifacts, and symbolic motifs reflect shared belief systems and aesthetic conventions. These artifacts may have served domestic, ritual, or commemorative functions, reinforcing communal values and continuity across generations. Such practices contributed to the stabilization of social norms, supported cooperative activity, and reinforced inter-community connections. By integrating ritual, economic, and social life, Kot Diji settlements exemplify the multidimensional approach necessary for sustaining complex, Proto-urban societies. By the conclusion of the Khat-Diji phase, communities in the lower Indus Valley had achieved significant advances in settlement organization, craft specialization, trade integration, and social coordination. Fortified structures, functional zoning, and emerging proto-administrative systems indicate a level of societal complexity that provided the necessary conditions for urbanization. These developments reflect a continuity of adaptation, experimentation, and innovation from earlier Chalcolithic villages, demonstrating that urban principles were being established incrementally over centuries. Khat-Diji settlements thus represent the critical bridge between early Harappan villages and the fully developed urban centers of the mature Harappan period. The cumulative innovations of this period, fortification, proto-administration, craft specialization, agricultural intensification, and trade expansion, set the stage for the emergence of large, centralized urban centers. The knowledge, skills, and organizational principles established during the Khat-Diji phase enabled communities to manage larger populations, coordinate specialized labor, and standardize cultural and economic practices. These advancements directly facilitated the development of the first urban centers in the Indus Valley, characterized by sophisticated urban planning, standardized material culture, and integrated administrative systems. The Khat-Diji culture thus represents a pivotal stage in the evolutionary trajectory of the Indus civilization, illustrating how incremental adaptation, coordination, and innovation prepared the region for the rise of complex urban society. During the Khat-Diji phase, approximately 3300 to 2600 BCE, trade, craft specialization, and cultural consolidation emerged as defining features of the evolving early Harappan communities. Archaeological evidence indicates that these settlements were not isolated. Rather, they were integrated into a network of interdependent villages and emerging urban centers spanning the lower Indus Valley, Baluchistan, and parts of Gujarat. This period demonstrates that economic, technological, and cultural systems were increasingly coordinated across spatially dispersed settlements, laying the groundwork for the standardized, highly organized urban society that would characterize the mature Harappan phase. Craft specialization, agricultural surplus, and controlled trade networks enabled population growth, technological innovation, and the dissemination of shared cultural practices across the region. Pottery, as both a utilitarian and symbolic medium, illustrates the consolidation of culture and technological expertise. Khat-Diji pottery exhibits standardized forms, burnished surfaces, and painted geometric motifs, demonstrating the transmission of knowledge and shared aesthetic sensibilities among different settlements. The consistency in pottery styles across multiple sites suggests not only functional efficiency, but also the reinforcement of communal identity. Workshops dedicated to pottery production were established within villages, indicating craft specialization and early division of labor. The presence of kilns and evidence of advanced firing techniques demonstrates both technical experimentation and knowledge dissemination. This level of organization reflects a society in which the production of standardized goods was increasingly coordinated to meet local needs and participate in broader exchange networks. Bead making and ornament production further exemplify craft specialization during this period. Semi-precious stones such as carnelian, agate, and turquoise were sourced locally and regionally, then shaped into uniform beads and pendants for personal adornment and trade. Archaeological studies reveal specialized workshops where artisans produced beads with remarkable precision using drilling techniques and abrasion methods. These products were distributed both within local settlements and across distant communities, indicating established trade networks. The standardization of size, form, and material suggests regulation and quality control, reflecting early economic planning. Craft specialization of this kind allowed communities to focus labor on productive tasks beyond subsistence, promoting technological advancement, economic complexity, and social differentiation. Copper metallurgy emerged as a critical technological development, enhancing craft production, agriculture, and societal complexity. Initially limited to small ornaments and tools, copper use expanded to include implements for domestic and agricultural purposes. Archaeological evidence indicates that smelting and shaping techniques were gradually refined, suggesting experimentation and skill transmission across communities. The adoption of copper tools reduced labor for construction and farming, enabling population growth and larger, more organized settlements. The distribution of copper artifacts across multiple sites highlights both regional trade and the dissemination of metallurgical knowledge, illustrating how technological innovation reinforced economic and social integration. Trade networks expanded significantly during the Khat Diji phase, connecting settlements over hundreds of kilometers. Marine shells from coastal regions, semi-precious stones from interior Baluchistan, and copper from distant sources were exchanged across the Indus Valley and beyond. Standardized weights and measures, along with uniform seal impressions and pottery types, indicate that trade was regulated and coordinated. These networks facilitated the exchange not only of material goods, but also of knowledge, technology, and cultural practices. Communities participating in trade experienced increased access to resources, which promoted specialization, surplus accumulation, and population growth. The interconnectivity of settlements also contributed to the emergence of shared cultural norms and reinforced collective identity, strengthening the social cohesion necessary for urbanization. Settlement patterns during this phase reflect increasing complexity and proto-urban organization. Houses were constructed using mud bricks, often in multi-roomed layouts that facilitated domestic, craft, and storage functions. Streets and pathways were organized to optimize movement, communication, and access to communal spaces. Elevated platforms and central areas may have served ritual, administrative, or communal purposes, indicating early forms of coordinated decision-making. Fortification walls and bastions suggest awareness of potential intercommunity conflict and the necessity for collective defense. These developments demonstrate that settlements were transitioning from simple villages to proto-urban centers capable of sustaining larger populations, specialized labor divisions, and coordinated economic activity. Agricultural practices continued to underpin economic and social stability. The cultivation of wheat and barley, combined with pastoralism involving cattle, sheep, and goats, provided a reliable food base for expanding settlements. Storage pits and granaries indicate systematic surplus management, ensuring stability during periods of environmental fluctuation. Evidence of field boundary markers and rudimentary irrigation suggests deliberate landscape management, reflecting sophisticated understanding of agricultural organization and labor coordination. The integration of agriculture with craft specialization and trade networks enabled communities to sustain population growth, reinforce social hierarchies, and support the development of coordinated administrative structures. Cultural consolidation during the Khat Diji phase is evident in ritual practices, symbolic artifacts, and shared artistic conventions. Figurines, terracotta seals, and decorative motifs indicate the persistence of fertility, domestic, and communal rites, reinforcing social cohesion and identity. These shared practices not only maintained cultural continuity, but also facilitated the integration of dispersed settlements into cohesive networks with common values and norms. This cultural standardization contributed to stability, allowing communities to focus on economic expansion, technological innovation, and social coordination. Ritual and symbolic practices thus played a key role in shaping the social fabric of early proto-urban societies. Emergent social hierarchies are inferred from the distribution of grave goods, variations in dwelling size, and the organization of craft workshops. Differential access to resources, participation in trade networks, and roles in production likely contributed to status differentiation within communities. These hierarchies, while not yet fully formalized, provided mechanisms for labor coordination, resource management, and conflict resolution. Early administrative practices, including the use of standardized weights and seal impressions, reinforced these emerging social structures, allowing communities to regulate economic activity and maintain cohesion across expanding settlement networks. By the end of the Khat Diji phase, the integration of trade, craft specialization, agriculture, and cultural consolidation had created a robust foundation for urbanization. Communities had developed the technological, social, and economic infrastructure necessary to sustain large populations, manage specialized labor, and coordinate inter-settlement networks. These innovations established both the material and organizational preconditions for the transition to the mature Harappan phase, characterized by extensive urban planning, standardized architecture, formalized administration, and long-distance trade. The Khat-Diji phase thus represents the culmination of early Harappan experimentation, providing the essential framework upon which the Indus civilization's urban complexity would be constructed. The cumulative developments of trade, craft specialization, and cultural standardization during this period highlight the deliberate and adaptive strategies that enabled communities to thrive in an increasingly interconnected and complex landscape. By coordinating labor, regulating economic interactions, and transmitting technological and cultural knowledge across settlements, Khat-Diji communities laid the groundwork for the first fully urban centers. These achievements demonstrate that urbanization in the Indus Valley was not abrupt, but rather the result of centuries of incremental innovation, social coordination, and environmental adaptation. The practices and structures established during this phase would directly inform the planning, administration, and cultural cohesion of the mature Harappan cities, ensuring the resilience and longevity of one of the world's earliest complex civilizations. By approximately 2600 BCE, the northwestern subcontinent had entered a period of unprecedented urban consolidation, marking the emergence of the mature Harappan phase of the Indus Valley Civilization. This period is characterized by the formation of large, planned urban centers, including Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Dhalavira, and Ganarwala, which collectively demonstrate sophisticated urban planning, standardized architecture, and complex social organization. These early cities were situated along the Indus River and its tributaries, strategically balancing access to water, fertile floodplains, and trade routes with the need for defense and sustainable resource management. Archaeological evidence indicates that urban centers were densely populated, with structures arranged in grid-like patterns and supported by carefully engineered drainage, water supply, and waste management systems. Such planning reflects deliberate design, communal coordination, and the capacity for centralized oversight in proto-urban governance. Residential architecture during this period illustrates both standardization and functional specialization. Houses were typically constructed from uniform mud bricks, with dimensions reflecting standardized measurement systems. Multi-room dwellings incorporated spaces for domestic activities, storage, craft production, and occasionally communal gathering. Streets were laid out in grid patterns, facilitating movement, trade, and social interaction while integrating with drainage and water management infrastructure. Some larger buildings, possibly administrative or ritual in function, were situated on raised platforms, emphasizing their communal or authoritative roles. These spatial arrangements indicate early principles of urban design, where efficiency, accessibility, and coordination of labor were systematically considered. The presence of standardized construction techniques across multiple urban centers highlights both technological proficiency and cultural cohesion. Water management and sanitation represent one of the most remarkable achievements of early Indus urbanism. Cities such as Mohenjo-daro and Harappa exhibit advanced drainage systems, including covered channels, soak pits, and terracotta pipes, designed to convey wastewater safely away from residential areas. Wells were constructed in individual households and public spaces, providing reliable access to potable water. Public baths, such as the Great Bath at Mohenjo-daro, suggest both ritual and hygienic functions, integrating communal and symbolic uses with practical needs. These innovations demonstrate not only technical skill, but also an understanding of urban health, resource distribution, and the social benefits of shared infrastructure. Efficient water management facilitated population growth, supported craft and agricultural production, and reinforced communal cohesion within dense urban settlements. Craft specialization and technological innovation flourished in mature Harappan urban centers. Workshops producing beadwork, pottery, metal tools, and ornaments indicate the emergence of specialized artisans and organized production systems. Beads of carnelian, agate, and shell were manufactured with standardized shapes and sizes, demonstrating precise drilling techniques and quality control. Copper and bronze tools were increasingly utilized for both agricultural and domestic purposes, reflecting the integration of metallurgy into everyday life. Pottery production became highly standardized, with distinct forms, sizes, and decorative motifs consistent across multiple cities. The coordination of craft production at scale indicates organized labor, skilled knowledge transfer, and the existence of interrelated economic networks, essential features of urban society. Trade networks expanded extensively during this period, both within the Indus region and with external civilizations. Archaeological evidence indicates that Indus cities were linked to settlements in Baluchistan, Gujarat, the Persian Gulf, and Mesopotamia through the exchange of raw materials, finished goods, and symbolic items. Standardized weights, measures, and seals facilitated the regulation of trade, ensuring consistency and reliability in economic transactions. Items such as carnelian beads, copper artifacts, and standardized pottery traveled long distances, highlighting both the economic sophistication and cultural influence of Indus urban centers. These interactions not only provided material resources, but also facilitated the dissemination of technology, ideas, and cultural norms, reinforcing regional cohesion and strengthening social networks across diverse communities. The development of standardized material culture reflects both economic and administrative coordination. Seal impressions, often engraved with animal motifs and script-like symbols, served as markers of ownership, trade regulation, and possibly identification of officials or institutions. Uniformity in brick size, weights, pottery forms, and urban layouts across geographically dispersed centers indicates a shared system of standards, suggesting centralized planning or widely accepted conventions. These features demonstrate that mature Harappan society had established mechanisms to regulate construction, production, and economic activity, enabling coordination at a scale unprecedented in earlier periods. Standardization also facilitated intercity trade, ensuring that goods produced in one location were compatible with practices in another, reinforcing integration across the urban network. Social organization within these early cities appears to have been hierarchical yet non-coercive, based on archaeological interpretation of residential size, burial practices, and distribution of material goods. Larger, multi-roomed houses and public structures suggest the presence of administrative or elite functions, while uniformity in dwelling construction across much of the population indicates a level of social equity unusual for early urban civilizations. Variations in grave goods imply differences in status or specialized roles, possibly linked to trade, craft specialization, or religious activity. While direct evidence of formalized leadership remains limited, the coordination of labor for urban construction, infrastructure maintenance, and craft production points to systems of governance capable of sustaining dense, organized populations. The integration of ritual and symbolic life played a significant role in reinforcing social cohesion and cultural continuity. Figurines, terracotta artifacts, and iconography found in urban centers suggest the presence of shared belief systems and community-oriented practices. While the precise nature of religious organization remains uncertain, these symbolic elements likely facilitated collective identity, social cohesion, and transmission of cultural norms. Ritual installations, such as baths and platforms, indicate that communal spaces served both functional and ceremonial purposes, integrating urban infrastructure with social and spiritual life. These practices supported the coordination of labor, reinforced collective identity, and legitimized emerging social structures. Urban centers of the mature Harappan period were also characterized by demographic concentration and population growth. Estimates suggest that cities such as Mohenjo-daro and Harappa supported tens of thousands of inhabitants, necessitating coordinated agricultural production, water management, and trade networks. The capacity to sustain dense populations depended on surplus management, efficient distribution systems, and labor specialization. Integration of residential, craft, and public spaces enabled the simultaneous support of domestic life, production, and civic infrastructure. This urban organization reflects an advanced understanding of spatial planning, economic coordination, and communal management, demonstrating that mature Harappan cities were both functional and socially complex. By the conclusion of this formative stage, the mature Harappan urban network had achieved a level of sophistication unparalleled in the region. The combination of planned settlements, standardized material culture, specialized production, trade integration, water management, and social cohesion enabled these cities to thrive over centuries. The achievements of this period reflect cumulative innovations in agriculture, craft, governance, and cultural practices developed over millennia, demonstrating continuity from Neolithic and Chalcolithic experimentation to fully realized urban society. These early cities established the foundational structures, both physical and organizational, that would define the Indus civilization's urban identity and resilience, providing a model of complex urbanism that continues to inform our understanding of early civilization. The formation of mature Harappan urban centers illustrates the convergence of environmental adaptation, technological innovation, social organization, and economic integration. By coordinating labor, standardizing practices, and facilitating intercity trade, these communities achieved urban density, functionality, and cultural cohesion. The knowledge, infrastructure, and social principles established during this phase directly enabled subsequent expansion, governance, and cultural development, ensuring the long-term viability of the Indus urban system. This period represents a critical juncture in human history, where incremental innovations and adaptive strategies culminated in the establishment of one of the world's earliest and most sophisticated urban civilizations. Mature Harappan cities, dating roughly from 2600 to 1900 BCE, represent a remarkable stage in urban development, defined by sophisticated planning, systematic water management, and integrated infrastructure. Excavations at Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, Dhalavira, and other urban centers reveal a consistent approach to city layout, reflecting deliberate design, functional zoning, and a concern for both efficiency and sustainability. Streets were arranged in near-perfect grids, with broad main avenues intersecting narrower lanes, facilitating movement, trade, and access to residential and public spaces. The uniformity of brick sizes and construction techniques across multiple sites indicates standardized building practices and suggests centralized oversight or shared construction conventions, enabling the replication of urban principles over vast areas. Residential architecture demonstrates both functional efficiency and social coordination. Most houses were constructed from standardized baked or sun-dried bricks and included multiple rooms designed for cooking, storage, domestic activities, and sometimes craft production. Courtyards provided light, ventilation, and communal space, while wells and bathrooms within dwellings indicate awareness of hygiene and water accessibility. The presence of large, multi-roomed houses alongside smaller, uniform dwellings suggests a social structure that balanced individual household needs with community organization. Such architectural planning enabled dense population settlement while maintaining access to resources, facilitating labor specialization, and promoting social cohesion. Water management represents one of the most extraordinary achievements of mature Harappan urbanism. Cities incorporated wells, covered drains, soak pits, and terracotta piping to manage potable water and wastewater effectively. Drainage channels ran alongside streets, ensuring that water from households, workshops, and public baths was conveyed safely out of the city. The Great Bath at Mohenjo-daro exemplifies both ritual and practical aspects of water use, functioning as a public facility and demonstrating engineering sophistication. Similar water features in other cities highlight the cultural and functional importance of water infrastructure. Efficient management of water resources enabled population growth, sustained craft production, and reduced the risk of disease, illustrating a comprehensive understanding of urban ecology. Granaries and storage facilities indicate systematic surplus management, essential for urban resilience. Large, centrally located granaries, constructed from standardized bricks and divided into multiple chambers, allowed communities to store agricultural produce securely and distribute it effectively during periods of scarcity. Storage structures within individual households complemented communal facilities, reflecting the integration of private and public economic practices. Surplus management not only supported dense urban populations, but also facilitated long-distance trade and craft specialization by ensuring reliable access to food resources. These practices reveal an advanced capacity for planning, organization, and logistical coordination in mature Harappan cities. Craft specialization and economic integration were central to urban function. Workshops producing beads, pottery, copper, bronze, and shell ornaments were often concentrated in specific city sectors, allowing for efficient production and distribution. Standardized products indicate coordinated techniques and quality control measures, while the presence of long-distance trade goods, such as carnelian beads and marine shells, demonstrates connectivity with regional and trans-regional networks. Standardized weights, measures, and seal impressions suggest a regulated economic system, enabling trust and consistency in commercial interactions. Such organization of craft and trade exemplifies the integration of production, resource allocation, and commerce within urban planning. The spatial organization of cities reflects deliberate zoning to separate residential, commercial, and public spaces. Streets were oriented to optimize circulation, minimize congestion, and integrate with drainage and water systems. Elevated platforms, open courtyards, and public spaces served communal, ritual, and administrative functions. The placement of workshops, granaries, and public baths indicates an awareness of functional interdependence, ensuring that urban infrastructure supported both economic activity and social cohesion. This organization allowed cities to accommodate dense populations while maintaining access to resources, hygiene, and communal services, demonstrating early urban design principles. Sanitation and public health were integral to mature Harappan infrastructure. Covered drains, soak pits, and well-planned sewage systems reduced the spread of disease and managed waste efficiently. Individual households had access to wells and private bathing areas, while public baths provided communal facilities. The emphasis on hygiene and sanitation reflects a comprehensive understanding of the needs of dense urban populations and illustrates how technological, social, and organizational systems were integrated to maintain health, productivity, and urban stability. Standardization across urban centers was a defining feature of mature Harappan planning. Uniformity in brick size, weights and measures, pottery, and urban layout across geographically distant cities indicates either coordinated governance or widely accepted conventions that guided construction and administration. This standardization facilitated intercity trade, ensured compatibility of infrastructure and goods, and reinforced cultural cohesion across the civilization. Shared standards allowed communities to function cohesively despite geographic separation, supporting economic integration, social identity, and long-term resilience. Cultural practices, social organization, and symbolic life were closely linked to urban infrastructure. Public spaces, baths, and platforms likely served communal and ritual purposes, reinforcing collective identity and social cohesion. Figurines, terracotta seals, and symbolic motifs demonstrate shared belief systems and aesthetic conventions across cities. These cultural elements were integrated into the spatial and functional design of settlements, illustrating how ritual, social structure, and urban planning co-evolved to support both daily life and long-term social stability. By the conclusion of this period, mature Harappan cities had achieved unprecedented integration of urban planning, water management, craft specialization, and social coordination. These achievements demonstrate the capacity for sustained population density, economic complexity, and cultural cohesion. Cities were carefully engineered systems where residential, commercial, and public spaces functioned in harmony, supported by efficient infrastructure and coordinated labor. The innovations of this period directly enabled the economic, administrative, and cultural achievements of the Indus civilization, providing a model of urban resilience and complexity unmatched in the region at the time. The development of planned streets, water supply, drainage systems, and integrated public spaces reflects the convergence of engineering knowledge, administrative capacity, and social organization. These systems allowed mature Harappan cities to maintain dense populations, facilitate craft production, and support trade networks. By embedding social, economic, and ritual functions within urban infrastructure, communities created cohesive, adaptable, and sustainable urban environments. This period demonstrates that urban complexity arose not from sudden change, but from incremental innovations in technology, planning, and governance, establishing the foundation for the Indus civilization's enduring legacy. Mature Harappan cities, flourishing between approximately 2600 and 1900 BCE, were interconnected through extensive trade networks, a highly organized craft economy, and emerging forms of social organization. Archaeological evidence demonstrates that these urban centers were not isolated. Rather, they functioned as nodes within a complex regional system that integrated production, exchange, and governance. Trade linked the Indus Valley to neighboring regions, including Baluchistan, Gujarat, the Iranian Plateau, and Mesopotamia, facilitating the movement of raw materials, finished goods, and cultural ideas. Simultaneously, the internal economy of the cities relied on specialized craft production, standardized tools, and surplus management, supporting population growth, technological innovation, and social cohesion. Trade networks during this period were remarkably sophisticated. Artifacts such as carnelian beads, semi-precious stones, marine shells, and metals were transported over hundreds of kilometers, indicating both regional and long-distance exchange. Standardized weights and measures found across cities suggest regulated trade, enabling predictable economic transactions and reducing uncertainty in exchanges. Indus seals, often engraved with animals, symbols, or inscriptions, likely functioned as markers of ownership, authentication, or administrative control, reinforcing the reliability and legitimacy of trade practices. These networks not only facilitated material exchange, but also promoted technological and cultural diffusion, strengthening social cohesion and shared identity among geographically dispersed settlements. Craft specialization played a central role in the economic organization of mature Harappan cities. Workshops producing pottery, beads, metal tools, ornaments, and other specialized goods were strategically situated within urban areas. Pottery demonstrates remarkable standardization in form, size, and decoration, facilitating both domestic use and trade. Bead-making workshops, employing precise drilling and shaping techniques, produced ornaments that were widely distributed across the region. Metalworking, particularly in copper and bronze, provided tools, weapons, and ritual items essential for agricultural productivity, craft activities, and social signaling. The concentration of skilled artisans in designated areas, coupled with standardization of outputs, reflects organized labor, technical knowledge transfer, and early economic planning. The management of agricultural surplus was a critical component supporting trade and craft specialization. Granaries and storage facilities within urban centers allowed for secure storage and redistribution of food resources, ensuring stability during environmental fluctuations or population pressures. Surplus enabled certain individuals or groups to focus on specialized tasks, including metalworking, beadmaking, and pottery production. This division of labor not only increased efficiency, but also reinforced social hierarchies, as access to surplus and control over production likely conferred status and influence. The coordination of surplus management, craft specialization, and trade represents an integrated economic system capable of sustaining large, densely populated urban centers. Urban social organization during this period was complex and multidimensional. Archaeological evidence indicates variations in dwelling sizes, burial practices, and access to material goods, suggesting differentiated social roles and status. Large multi-roomed houses and elevated platforms may have accommodated administrative or ritual functions, while uniform smaller dwellings indicate broad social stability. Emerging hierarchies were likely linked to participation in trade networks, craft specialization, and resource management rather than coercive power. The coordination required for urban infrastructure, surplus storage, and craft production implies mechanisms for decision-making, labor organization, and conflict resolution that underpin social cohesion. Cultural and symbolic practices further reinforced urban identity and social integration. Figurines, terracotta seals, and decorative motifs suggest shared belief systems and aesthetic norms across cities. Public structures, such as baths and platforms, integrated ritual, communal, and administrative functions, demonstrating the interplay of social, spiritual, and practical life. Participation in shared cultural practices strengthened cohesion among residents and between interconnected urban centers, ensuring that trade, craft, and administrative systems operated within a stable social framework. These practices highlight how cultural integration underpinned economic and technological success. The interplay between trade, craft specialization, and social organization created a resilient urban system. Trade networks provided raw materials necessary for specialized production, while craft workshops produced goods that supported both local consumption and long-distance exchange. Surplus management ensured population sustenance, enabling individuals to engage in specialized labor. Coordinated infrastructure, standardized tools, and consistent urban planning facilitated efficient movement of goods, labor, and resources. Social organization and emerging administrative mechanisms allowed communities to manage these complex systems effectively, maintaining cohesion and adaptability across diverse urban centers. Long-distance trade connected Indus cities to external civilizations, amplifying economic and cultural influence. Artifacts from Mesopotamia, including Indus seals and carnelian beads, demonstrate reciprocal exchange and recognition of standardized products. Trade facilitated not only material acquisition but also knowledge transfer, spreading technological innovations, artistic motifs, and administrative practices. Integration into broader economic networks enhanced the sustainability of urban centers and reinforced cultural cohesion within the Indus region, creating a system in which external interactions complemented internal organization. Standardization in material culture, craft production, and economic regulation played a crucial role in maintaining urban efficiency and integration. Uniform brick sizes, pottery forms, weights, and seal motifs reflect adherence to shared conventions across cities. These standards enabled predictable trade, facilitated coordination of labor and production, and reinforced cultural unity across geographically dispersed settlements. Standardization functioned as both a practical mechanism for managing complex urban systems and a symbolic tool affirming collective identity, ensuring that social, economic, and technological processes remained coherent throughout the Indus network. By the conclusion of the mature Harappan period, trade networks, craft specialization, and social organization had established a highly integrated urban civilization. Communities demonstrated the capacity to coordinate large-scale production, manage surplus, facilitate regional and long-distance trade, and maintain social cohesion. The interdependence of economic, technological, and cultural systems created resilience, adaptability, and continuity across the urban network. These achievements provided the foundation for population stability, technological innovation, and cultural persistence, ensuring that the Indus civilization functioned as a cohesive, sophisticated society over several centuries. The cumulative development of trade, specialized production, and social coordination illustrates how mature Harappan cities sustained economic complexity, cultural cohesion, and technological innovation. By integrating craft workshops, surplus management, regulated trade, and administrative oversight, these urban centers operated as coordinated systems rather than isolated settlements. This integration enabled population growth, resource stability, and social differentiation, providing the essential infrastructure for both everyday life and long-term urban resilience. The practices established during this period would underpin subsequent developments in governance, cultural consolidation, and eventual adaptation during the late Harappan period, demonstrating the enduring significance of the mature Harappan economic and social model. Urban governance in the mature Harappan period can be understood only through the material record these cities left behind, and the record suggests a system of organization far more complex than earlier agricultural communities of the region. When examining sites such as Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Dhalavira, Gannarawala, Kalibangan, and Lathau, a consistent pattern of structural order appears. Each settlement shows standardized features, grid-based streets, carefully measured blocks, robust drainage lines, and public structures positioned in predictable areas. Although the civilization left no deciphered written accounts that explain administrative institutions directly, the architectural clarity provides strong evidence for coordinated civic planning. This section traces the logical emergence of governance structures that enabled cities across vast distances to follow coherent rules. It defines how space, labor, and shared norms likely operated in daily life. It also examines how stability was maintained and how the city's physical layout reflected collective priorities. By presenting these patterns in sequence, the narrative outlines a system where authority was distributed through mechanisms that emphasized regulation, maintenance, and predictable routines rather than monumental displays of individual rulers. Archaeological evidence suggests that the concept of urban governance emerged gradually as population density increased. Earlier settlements had relied on informal leadership or kin-based authority, but the scale of mature Harappan cities demanded new kinds of oversight. The layout of Mohenjo-daro's lower town, for example, indicates that entire neighborhoods were constructed with standardized brick sizes, aligned streets, and coordinated water channels. Such uniformity implies administrative planning rather than spontaneous expansion. The repeated use of bricks with the same ratio, 1 to 2 to 4, across cities separated by hundreds of kilometers indicates some form of regulated production system. This suggests not only technical coordination but also a shared civic expectation. Buildings should conform to agreed-upon measurements to ensure compatibility and ease of maintenance. From this perspective, city planning served both functional and social purposes. It helped stabilize urban life and encouraged residents to participate in collective norms that were neither arbitrary nor dictated by individual ambition. A central insight arises from the elevated mounds, often interpreted as citadels. These elevated zones may not represent palatial authority, but rather protected public areas for administration, storage, or community gatherings. Their standardized proportions and robust construction imply deliberate planning. Mohenjo-daro's citadel, for instance, contains several large structures aligned along major streets, including the well-known complex often called the Great Bath. Rather than interpreting this structure as a ritual site alone, many scholars emphasize its evidence for sophisticated water management. Features such as watertight bricks, drainage outlets, and adjacent wells reveal a technical system overseen by skilled planners. The consistent maintenance required for such structures points to the existence of organized labor groups and administrative oversight. These observations invite an analytical question. How could such large communities operate harmoniously without centralized record-keeping in a form recognizable to modern bureaucracies? Although the Harappan script remains undeciphered, its frequent appearance on seals suggests its use for marking goods, controlling trade flows, or identifying administrative units. Such indirect evidence supports the view that governance operated through distributed mechanisms embedded in daily economic transactions. The street grids of Harappan cities provide further insights into how civic planning intersected with governance. Streets often ran north-south and east-west, forming rectangular blocks with predictable intersections. This orientation may have been chosen for environmental management, such as regulating wind flow and facilitating drainage. It also indicates a commitment to urban regulation. Lanes connected residential clusters, ensuring that each family had access to public water points and waste disposal routes. The presence of covered drains beneath the streets shows that public authorities prioritized sanitation long before similar systems appeared in many later civilizations. The uniformity of these systems across cities points to shared planning norms. Such infrastructure required consistent maintenance, implying both the ability and the responsibility to mobilize labor. Governance in this context was likely expressed through systematic upkeep rather than coercive control. One of the most significant revelations about Harappan urbanism is the emphasis on water management. Wells were abundant and evenly distributed across neighborhoods, indicating that access to clean water was treated as a civic priority. Many houses had private bathing areas connected to the drainage grid, demonstrating that investment in hygiene was not limited to elites. The scale of this infrastructure suggests planners who evaluated groundwater levels, projected seasonal needs, and assigned responsibilities for construction and repair. In Mohenjo-daro alone, hundreds of wells have been documented, reflecting both population density and institutional foresight. This systematic provision of water resources reveals how governance in Harappan cities rested on predictability and shared access rather than hierarchy. The fact that nearly every household had similar facilities reinforces the interpretation that leadership focused on ensuring functional equality within the urban environment. Market organization also sheds light on the administrative character of mature Harappan society. Standardized weights and measures have been found throughout the region. These weights, typically made from chert, exhibit consistent ratios that would have facilitated regulated trade. Their uniformity indicates that authorities had established and enforced measurement standards. The presence of such weights in different occupational zones suggests institutional oversight rather than personal initiative. Markets likely involved regulated stalls, monitored exchanges, and agreed procedures for resolving disputes or verifying transactions. Although no dedicated market buildings have been conclusively identified, artifact distribution suggests the existence of commercial districts. The standardization of weights is one of the clearest examples of governance embedded in material culture. Through these simple objects, the civilization achieved economic consistency across long distances. Evidence from craft production areas further supports the view that governance functioned through regulation rather than centralized rule. Specialized workshops at Harappa, such as bead-making facilities and shell-working centers, appear to have operated within planned spaces. These zones show signs of organized labor, controlled distribution of raw materials, and adherence to standard production techniques. Even though the workers may not have been tied to a central authority, the consistency of output suggests monitoring or shared guild-like standards. Such production centers required predictable supply chains, which in turn depended on civic regulation of storage, transport, and trade. The organization of these zones contrasts sharply with the disorderly craft quarters found in some contemporary regions. The Harappan emphasis on orderly spatial distribution demonstrates a governance system that prioritized efficiency and safety, with workshops placed away from residential clusters to reduce fire risks and manage pollution. Administrative coordination becomes especially clear when examining storage and granary complexes. The traditional term granary may not be entirely accurate, but these large, multi-room structures show evidence of platforms, ventilation, and controlled access. Their standardized designs imply a function related to regulated storage, possibly of grains, goods, or trade items. The key point is not what they stored but how the storage was organized. The presence of loading bays, platforms, and adjacent courtyards indicates a logistical system involving scheduled deliveries, monitored inventories, and designated personnel. Such systems are hallmarks of administrative governance. They reveal that the civilization maintained collective resources essential for stability and that the handling of these resources required oversight with rules known to the community. Residential planning also contributes to our understanding of governance. In mature Harappan cities, houses were typically arranged in blocks with predictable patterns. Many had multiple rooms organized around central courtyards. Access points were controlled by narrow entrances, which opened directly into covered or semi-covered passages rather than large public streets. This design suggests an emphasis on privacy and controlled interaction. At the same time, the uniformity in house layouts indicates municipal guidelines for construction. The presence of household wells and latrines connected to public drains reflects a governance approach that integrated private and communal responsibilities. Residents maintained their immediate spaces, while authorities ensured that the main drainage lines functioned effectively. Such cooperation between private households and public systems embodies a distinctive model of governance. Obligations distributed across layers of society rather than concentrated at the top. A notable feature in mature cities is the absence of monumental palaces or lavish tombs. This absence does not mean that leadership did not exist. Rather, it suggests that authority expressed itself through regulation, standardization, and civic maintenance. Instead of constructing towering monuments, leaders invested in infrastructure that served the community. This pattern challenges traditional assumptions about early urban governance, which often rely on the presence of centralized rulers. In the Harappan case, the archaeological record points toward collective or corporate governance. This model involves decision-making shared among groups, possibly councils, administrators, merchants, or elders, who cooperated to manage communal needs. Corporate governance is consistent with the egalitarian appearance of urban space, where standardized facilities and uniform housing indicate limited material disparity among residents. This does not imply complete equality, but suggests a society where public order and functional infrastructure were prioritized over displays of elite wealth. The use of seals represents another dimension of civic planning and administrative order. These seals, typically made of steatite, often carry short inscriptions accompanied by animal motifs. While their exact meaning remains undeciphered, their distribution suggests that they functioned as identifiers for goods, merchants, or institutions. Their standardized manufacturing process also points to regulated craft traditions. Seals with recurring motifs imply shared symbolic systems known to administrators and traders. Their role in tagging goods indicates that the civilization used a visual or symbolic method to maintain oversight of production and exchange. This mechanism supported long-distance trade with regions such as Mesopotamia, Oman, and the Iranian plateau. The ability to manage such networks reinforces the interpretation of a governance system grounded in reliable documentation, even if that documentation remains undeciphered to modern scholars. Harappan civic planning extended to environmental management as well. Cities were often built on raised platforms to protect them from seasonal floods. Mohenjo-daro, for example, stands on a series of elevated mounds that reflect repeated rebuilding efforts. Such reconstruction required coordinated planning, resource mobilization, and long-term thinking. Authorities would have needed to assess flood risks, allocate labor, and manage construction materials. This continuity of planning over generations speaks to a governance system capable of preserving institutional memory. It also illustrates the civilization's pragmatic approach. Rather than constructing defensive walls or military fortifications, they invested in measures that protected economic and social life against predictable natural forces. The spatial organization of public buildings and their proximity to residential quarters reveal another layer of governance. Public wells, large drainage conduits, and bathing structures were placed at strategic points to ensure accessibility. The consistency of these placements across regions indicates shared planning principles. Such principles likely emerged from administrative bodies that developed standardized guidelines. These guidelines would have been communicated to builders, craftsmen, and residents. In this way, governance was embedded not only in the visible structures, but also in the knowledge systems that guided construction. Cities served as repositories of this knowledge, preserving and transmitting techniques essential for maintaining urban stability. The distribution of artifacts also hints at administrative zoning. In some cities, specific areas contain concentrations of luxury goods, such as carnelian beads, shell ornaments, and specialized pottery. These patterns suggest that certain neighborhoods or blocks may have housed craft specialists or administrators. The zoning appears deliberate rather than incidental. Such organization reduces conflict, enhances efficiency, and supports regulatory oversight. It also implies that residents understood the functional identity of each zone and followed norms regarding its use. This arrangement demonstrates how governance structures relied on spatial order to maintain civic harmony. Despite the sophistication of these systems, there is little evidence for coercive control. Weapons are rare in the archaeological record, and fortification walls are uncommon. This absence suggests that governance relied more on consensus and shared social expectations than on force. The emphasis on standardized infrastructure, uniform housing, and regulated utilities points to a culturally embedded administrative framework. People likely participated in civic responsibilities because these responsibilities were understood as necessary for communal well-being. The durability of these systems over several centuries shows that this model of governance was effective. The final feature that illustrates mature Harappan governance is the interconnectedness of its cities. Across a region spanning more than 1 million square kilometers, cities share design principles, infrastructure solutions, and material standards. This coherence does not imply a single centralized authority, but indicates a network of administrative traditions transmitted across generations and regions. Such traditions allowed each city to operate within a recognizable framework while adapting to local environmental conditions. Governance thus emerged not only from institutions, but also from shared cultural expectations about how cities should function. This section clarifies how urban governance in mature Harappan cities developed through coordination, regulation, and adherence to standardized principles. The emphasis on infrastructure, sanitation, measurement, and environmental planning demonstrates a model of civic administration grounded in functionality rather than authority figures. The material record provides a clear image of a society that valued consistency, maintenance, and shared responsibility. As the narrative progresses, the next section will explore how this administrative order supported the broader economic networks that sustained the civilization's stability and facilitated exchange across vast distances. The economic networks of the mature Harappan civilization formed one of the most integrated and far-reaching commercial systems of the Bronze Age. Across a span of more than 1 million square kilometers, communities exchanged raw materials, finished goods, and agricultural commodities in patterns that reveal both local adaptation and long-distance coordination. The archaeological record shows that Harappan trade was not a marginal activity, but a central feature of urban stability. From the standardized weights used in marketplaces to the seals marking goods, every stage of production and exchange reflects administrative oversight. This section examines how these economic systems developed, how they were regulated, and why they became decisive in shaping the civilization's trajectory. By following the distribution of artifacts and analyzing the layout of trade-related structures, it becomes possible to reconstruct a system where commercial activity, civic order, and urban planning formed a coherent whole. The goal is to present how trade operated, how it was sustained, and how its regulatory mechanisms contributed to a stable economic environment across multiple regions. Archaeological surveys reveal an economy grounded in regional specialization. Certain areas produced resources unavailable in other parts of the civilization. The Thar Desert margin, for instance, supplied copper from Gujarat and Rajasthan, while the Indus floodplains produced large quantities of wheat, barley, and other staples. The coastal regions of Makran and Gujarat provided marine resources, including shells used for ornaments and tools. Farther afield, the civilization maintained contact with lands rich in lapis lazuli, tin, and other materials essential for craft production. These diverse resources enabled complex manufacturing systems within cities. Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Latau, and Dhalavira housed workshops that processed raw materials into finished goods such as beads, pottery, seals, and copper tools. This degree of specialization indicates a steady flow of inputs and outputs supervised by administrators who monitored production quality and distribution. One of the most informative features of Harappan economic organization is the uniformity of weights and measures. Thousands of chert weights have been found across the region, nearly identical in shape and proportion. Their consistent ratios indicate a standardized system where merchants and consumers operated under predictable rules. Such standardization required an authority capable of establishing measurement norms and ensuring their adoption across distant cities. These weights reflect more than economic convenience. They demonstrate the presence of a regulatory culture committed to fairness and consistency in trade. The use of these weights in workshops, storerooms, and household contexts suggests that economic oversight extended beyond formal marketplaces. In this regard, economic administration was integrated into daily life, shaping how individuals measured grain, exchanged goods, and assessed value. The Harappan seal system contributed significantly to the regulation of economic activity. Seals, typically carved from steatite, carry inscriptions and images that likely identified merchants, institutions, or trade organizations. When pressed into clay tags, these seals marked goods during transportation or storage. This mechanism provided a means of tracking shipments and verifying authenticity. The widespread distribution of seals, along with the uniformity of their motifs, supports the interpretation that trade administration operated through encoded visual systems. Even though the inscriptions remain undeciphered, their consistent form suggests that Harappan authorities developed a sophisticated method for recording, verifying, and categorizing goods. Such practices contributed to a secure commercial environment where transactions could be monitored without direct intervention by officials. Trade flourished along both land and river routes. The Indus River and its tributaries formed natural corridors for transportation, enabling movement of goods between urban centers and rural hinterlands. Boats likely carried agricultural products, crafted goods, and raw materials between settlements, while carts and animal caravans linked riverine towns to areas beyond the floodplain. The presence of dock-like structures at Lothal, often interpreted as a port facility, indicates maritime activity. Even if interpretations of the dock remain debated, the settlement's strategic location near navigable waterways and the presence of imported artifacts strengthened the argument that it served as a coastal trade hub. Such sites linked the Harappan world to communities in Oman, Bahrain, and Mesopotamia. The presence of Harappan seals in Mesopotamian cities such as Uar and the identification of Harappan-style pottery on foreign coasts provide strong material evidence for sustained international exchange. The distribution of certain raw materials further clarifies the extent of Harappan trade networks. Copper artifacts found in the Indus region match mineral signatures from mines in Rajasthan and Oman. Similarly, beads made from carnelian, a stone sourced in Gujarat, appear at sites across the civilization and in foreign contexts. The geographic spread of these items shows that administrators were able to coordinate extraction, processing, and distribution across long distances. The movement of these goods relied on predictable systems of transport, storage, and record-keeping, all likely supported by regulatory institutions. The regularity of these patterns suggests that commerce was not left to unregulated individual initiative. Instead, it was embedded within a structured framework that ensured continuity and minimized conflict. Evidence from craft production workshops gives further insight into how trade intersected with administrative control. In Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, bead-making facilities show signs of organized labor divisions. Craftsmen used standardized techniques to drill, polish, and shape beads, producing items prized both locally and abroad. The presence of unfinished beads, discarded tools, and workshop waste reveals that production followed routine procedures. These procedures would have required a supply of raw materials, oversight of quality, and coordination with merchants. The consistency of craft methods across sites indicates shared training traditions, possibly maintained through institutional mechanisms. The existence of specialized neighborhoods where such workshops were concentrated suggests zoning regulations that separated residential and industrial activities for safety and efficiency. Economic control extended to agricultural production. The cities depended on vast hinterlands for food supplies. Farmers grew wheat, barley, and pulses, while herders raised cattle, buffalo, sheep, and goats. The surplus from these regions supported the dense populations of urban centers. Storage structures interpreted as granaries likely played a key role in stabilizing food distribution. Although their precise function remains debated, the architectural design, featuring raised platforms, segmented chambers, and controlled access points, suggests a system for managing surplus. This indicates administrative oversight over collection, storage, and redistribution, which would have reduced the risk of shortages caused by seasonal fluctuations. Such oversight required record-keeping methods, perhaps involving seals or tokens, to track contributions and withdrawals. The organization of rural settlements also reflects economic coordination. Smaller sites surrounding major cities acted as production nodes, supplying agricultural goods and raw materials. Excavations reveal consistent pottery styles, tool types, and settlement patterns across these villages. This uniformity indicates that rural producers operated within shared cultural and economic frameworks. Their integration into the broader trade network was facilitated by routes linking them to urban markets. Administrators likely monitored these routes, ensuring safe passage and regulating interactions. This level of integration created a balanced economic system where rural and urban communities were interdependent. Trade was not solely about materials. It also involved the transmission of ideas and techniques. The spread of standardized weights, craft technologies, and architectural methods shows that knowledge circulated within the Harappan world. Such diffusion required networks of communication maintained through administrative oversight. Planners likely monitored the application of building guidelines. Craft specialists may have shared techniques through institutional channels, and merchants transmitted information about market demands. This flow of knowledge contributed to the civilization's coherence, ensuring that distant settlements followed shared standards. International trade relations expanded the Harappan economy's reach. Mesopotamian texts refer to a land called Meluhha, widely identified with the Indus region. These texts describe trade in copper, carnelian, timber, and other goods. The presence of Harappan seals in Mesopotamian ports supports this connection. The exchange between these regions suggests diplomatic coordination, even if indirect. Merchants would have needed protection, clear rules for exchange, and reliable documentation. Harappan administrators likely contributed to this environment by establishing trade protocols and regulating long-distance commerce. Their ability to maintain consistent exports over centuries indicates stable institutions ensuring the quality and reliability of goods. The internal structure of Harappan markets can be inferred from artifact distribution. Clusters of shop-like rooms, paved courtyards, and storage jars indicate commercial activity. In Mohenjo-daro, certain blocks appear to have housed merchants and traders who engaged in routine exchanges. The layout of these commercial spaces suggests an organized marketplace where vendors followed established rules of conduct. Administrators may have monitored these areas, ensuring that measurements, weights, and transactions adhered to standards. Such monitoring would have prevented disputes and maintained trust within the community. The predictability of these markets contributed to urban cohesion, enabling citizens to participate in economic life without fear of exploitation. Harappan economic stability relied on risk management. Seasonal flooding, droughts, and shifting river courses posed significant challenges. Administrators responded with infrastructure designed to mitigate these risks. Elevated city platforms, drainage systems, and reservoir structures at sites like Dalavira illustrate long-term planning. By controlling water supply and protecting settlements from environmental hazards, authorities ensured that trade and production remained uninterrupted. This stability allowed merchants to operate across seasons, fostering commercial confidence. The reliability of infrastructure became a form of economic regulation, supporting trade indirectly through environmental control. One of the most revealing aspects of Harappan trade administration is the limited evidence for social inequality. Unlike civilizations dominated by elite-controlled economies, the Harappan system appears to have distributed wealth and resources more evenly. The uniformity of housing, standardized household utilities, and absence of grand palaces suggests an economy where wealth was widespread rather than concentrated. This does not imply absolute equality, but it does indicate that administrators prioritized collective stability over elite accumulation. This orientation influenced trade, enabling merchants across the social spectrum to participate in commerce under fair conditions. Such a balanced economic environment supported long-term prosperity, reducing the likelihood of internal conflict. The transport mechanisms used in trade further demonstrate administrative coordination. Terracotta models of carts, depictions of boats, and structural evidence for loading areas reveal the logistical strategies employed by Harappan traders. Overland trade likely relied on cattle-drawn carts traveling across established routes marked by staging points or small settlements. Riverine trade used flat-bottomed boats capable of navigating shallow waters. Maritime exchanges utilized coastal settlements linked to inland networks. Administrators ensured the maintenance of roads, regulation of ports, and supervision of storage facilities. This comprehensive logistical framework made it possible for goods to move efficiently and reliably across vast distances. The economic networks of the mature Harappan civilization formed a system where trade, administration, and urban planning worked together to maintain stability. Market regulation, craft specialization, and long-distance exchange created a dynamic commercial environment. The uniformity of weights, the widespread use of seals, and the consistent distribution of artifacts indicate an administrative structure embedded in economic life. Rather than relying on state coercion, this system depended on consensus, shared norms, and institutional routines. As the civilization expanded its trade relations and deepened its internal networks, these administrative mechanisms became increasingly essential. They provided the structure through which the economy operated and sustained urban populations. The evolution of these economic networks introduces the next stage in the civilization's development. With stable trade routes, regulated production, and coordinated distribution, cities became increasingly interconnected. This interconnectedness supported further growth, but also made the system sensitive to disruptions. The next section will explore how these urban and economic structures shaped daily life and contributed to the cultural patterns that define the mature Harappan period. The Indus Valley Civilization developed a remarkably sophisticated system of administrative oversight, which can be observed through the widespread use of seals, inscriptions, standardized weights, and associated artifacts. Unlike other contemporary civilizations, such as Mesopotamia or Egypt, the Indus people appear to have emphasized functional regulation and coordination over the glorification of rulers or monumental authority. Archaeological excavations from Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Latau, and Dhalavira reveal thousands of steatite seals, many of which bear uniform inscriptions alongside animal motifs or abstract symbols. These artifacts, while still undeciphered, are consistent across multiple urban centers spanning hundreds of kilometers, suggesting a deliberate attempt at maintaining economic and administrative consistency. The careful crafting and repeated use of these seals indicates they were not merely decorative, but served as practical tools for authentication, trade regulation, and possibly identification of ownership or production origin. This evidence underscores a sophisticated approach to governance that relied on visual and material standardization to coordinate a complex urban and interregional economy. Standardized weights and measures complement the information provided by seals. Cubical stone weights, often inscribed with precise divisions, have been found throughout the Indus region, displaying remarkable uniformity. These weights facilitated consistent trade both within the urban networks and with distant partners, including Mesopotamia. The precision observed in these weights implies not only technical skill, but also an overarching regulatory framework that maintained economic stability over large areas. The relationship between seals and weights likely supported logistical coordination. While seals identified and verified goods, weights ensured fair exchange and standardization. The repeated presence of these artifacts in workshops, markets, and storage facilities suggests that administrative control was embedded in daily routines, linking producers, merchants, and urban authorities. By implementing such tools, the Indus civilization achieved a level of bureaucratic functionality comparable to early states without requiring an explicit, centralized monarchy. In addition to material standardization, the Indus script provides further insight into administrative practices. Although undeciphered, the inscriptions found on seals and tablets are remarkably uniform in form, with short sequences of characters, often appearing alongside motifs such as the unicorn, elephant, or composite animals. The brevity of these texts, combined with their placement on trade and craft-related objects, supports the theory that writing was primarily utilitarian, serving to track goods, indicate ownership, or manage transactions rather than to record long narratives or codify laws. This functional approach to written communication aligns with archaeological patterns showing highly organized urban layouts, neighborhood specialization, and coordinated craft production. The Indus script's consistency across different urban centers also demonstrates a shared cognitive and cultural framework, enabling distant communities to participate in a common economic and administrative system. The use of seals, weights, and inscriptions was closely integrated with daily economic life. Artisans and merchants relied on these tools to maintain quality control, prevent fraud, and facilitate long-distance exchange. For instance, bead-making workshops produced thousands of standardized ornaments, many of which were marked with seals or stored using measured containers. By coordinating production and exchange in this manner, the Indus civilization could maintain high-quality output and predictable trade relationships, ensuring both local stability and international credibility. Archaeological evidence of sealed packages and uniform containers indicates that administrative oversight extended beyond the city limits, incorporating rural suppliers and regional marketplaces into an interconnected system. This arrangement reflects the civilization's emphasis on procedural regulation, demonstrating that complex organization can exist independently of monumental authority. These administrative innovations were instrumental in sustaining the civilization's internal coherence and external engagement. The repeated motifs, consistent script forms, and standardized weights provided a shared framework that connected cities, workshops, and marketplaces over extensive distances. By embedding regulation in material culture and everyday practice, the Indus people maintained order, trust, and efficiency without relying on visible rulers or centralized coercion. Such systems likely encouraged compliance through practicality and shared expectation rather than through hierarchical enforcement, illustrating an alternative model of urban administration during the Bronze Age. This development marked a key stage in the civilization's trajectory, supporting population growth, trade networks, and the social structures examined in the following chapter, which focuses on governance, social organization, and the integration of daily life within these complex urban systems. This functional, standardized, and widespread administrative apparatus, therefore, provides crucial context for understanding how the Indus Valley Civilization sustained its urban density, economic productivity, and cultural cohesion. It forms the foundation for the next phase of exploration, linking material regulation to broader social organization, household patterns, and civic practices, which will be examined in detail in the subsequent chapter. The political organization of the Indus Valley Civilization presents an unusual and intriguing model among early Bronze Age societies. Unlike contemporary civilizations such as Egypt, Mesopotamia, or the Shang dynasty, there is no archaeological evidence of palaces, monumental tombs, or statuary of rulers. Excavations across Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Dhalavira, and Lodhal reveal highly organized cities with uniform urban planning, yet they lack the conventional markers of centralized monarchy or dynastic authority. Streets follow precise grids, brick sizes are standardized, and sanitation infrastructure is consistent across settlements, suggesting coordinated oversight. Scholars propose that governance was likely civic and collective, perhaps executed by councils or administrative committees overseeing urban functions such as planning, trade regulation, water management, and craft standardization. Such an arrangement emphasizes institutional authority over personal power and demonstrates that complex urban administration could exist without centralized kingship. This approach challenges traditional assumptions about the necessity of monarchs for early state development. Evidence from city layouts supports the theory of decentralized governance. Residential blocks are carefully arranged around main thoroughfares, with neighborhoods containing wells, latrines, and communal spaces, while public structures such as granaries, assembly platforms, and large baths occupy central locations. These patterns indicate both functional hierarchy and equitable access to essential resources. Administrative responsibilities appear to have been spatially distributed rather than concentrated in a single ruler's palace. The repeated presence of assembly platforms or raised citadel-like areas may indicate locations for civic decision-making or storage of communal resources rather than seats of royal authority. By distributing responsibilities across civic structures, the Indus communities could maintain order, resource allocation, and urban maintenance over multiple centuries. Standardization of material culture further corroborates civic governance. Uniform brick dimensions, consistent weights, and repeated motifs on seals across distant urban centers suggest coordinated regulation. Workshops adhered to precise specifications, and trade systems depended on shared administrative tools, including seals and measuring devices. The consistency in construction and artifact production indicates a level of oversight that extended beyond individual households or artisans, requiring either formalized committees or embedded social norms. These regulations appear to have been maintained through routine enforcement and shared expectations rather than coercion by a centralized ruler. In this sense, governance in the Indus Valley combined technical standardization with social compliance, providing structural stability while maintaining relative egalitarianism. Archaeological interpretations suggest that this governance system relied on functional authority tied to urban management. Responsibilities may have been divided across specialized roles: officials overseeing water supply, granaries, trade coordination, craft production, or neighborhood sanitation. The absence of monumental propaganda implies that authority was exercised through effective procedures rather than symbolic domination. By embedding oversight in practical structures and daily routines, the Indus civilization achieved cohesion without visible monarchy. This arrangement allowed cities to sustain dense populations, complex trade networks, and coordinated craft production while avoiding the social stratification commonly associated with early states. In effect, governance was procedural and collaborative, emphasizing efficiency, accountability, and long-term urban sustainability. Comparative studies reinforce the uniqueness of this model. Whereas Mesopotamian or Egyptian cities relied on rulers to enforce laws, mobilize labor, and embody political ideology, the Indus approach demonstrates that alternative pathways to complexity were viable. Civic structures, standardized artifacts, and regulated trade collectively substituted for personal authority, suggesting that early civilizations could rely on distributed decision-making and institutional norms rather than hierarchical command. Such findings highlight the sophistication of Indus administrative thought and the innovation inherent in non-monarchical governance systems. This civic framework shaped daily life and social organization, creating neighborhoods that functioned as interdependent units within broader urban networks. It enabled coordinated economic activity, equitable resource access, and maintenance of public infrastructure. By functioning effectively without kings, the Indus Valley Civilization offers an exceptional case study in early governance, illustrating that advanced urban societies could achieve social stability, economic prosperity, and infrastructural coherence through procedural regulation and collective administration. The next section will examine how these civic structures intersected with households, community organization, and social stratification, providing insight into the everyday life of the Indus people and the mechanisms that sustained their cities. Archaeological evidence from the Indus Valley reveals a society characterized by relative egalitarianism, yet with subtle forms of social differentiation linked to occupation, wealth, and neighborhood function. Unlike contemporary civilizations, there is limited evidence for pronounced elite residences or monumental burial practices. Excavations show that most houses were constructed with standardized baked bricks, arranged along rectilinear street grids, and often featured private wells, latrines, and courtyards. While the majority of dwellings are modest in size, occasional larger residences suggest households with expanded responsibilities or higher economic standing, potentially related to administrative oversight or craft coordination. These variations indicate that social hierarchy existed, but it was functional and closely tied to occupation and urban participation rather than personal rule or inherited nobility. Understanding household structure is essential to appreciating how civic cohesion and community life were maintained across sprawling urban centers. Residential organization demonstrates a thoughtful integration of daily life with community function. Houses were grouped into neighborhoods with access to shared resources such as wells, streets, and sometimes public bathing facilities. Courtyards served as focal points for domestic labor, social interaction, and skill transmission, particularly for children learning crafts or household management. The spatial arrangement of homes allowed for efficient supervision of shared infrastructure and facilitated communication between residents, reinforcing social cohesion. In addition, the distribution of workshops, granaries, and marketplaces within and between neighborhoods indicates that households were embedded within broader economic and civic networks. This integration illustrates that social organization in the Indus civilization was structured not by rigid caste hierarchies, but by functional interdependence and participation in communal systems. Craft specialization contributed to subtle social differentiation within neighborhoods. Artisans producing beads, pottery, metal tools, and textiles were often concentrated in dedicated quarters or streets, creating identifiable occupational clusters. These specialists likely enjoyed recognition or modest prestige due to their skills, yet there is no evidence of coercive monopolies or dynastic control over production. Households containing workshop facilities may have combined family life with economic activity, embedding social roles into domestic spaces. Standardized production techniques, combined with uniform weights and seals, suggest that occupational roles were regulated to ensure consistency rather than to establish rank. This functional stratification allowed communities to coordinate labor effectively, maintain high-quality output, and sustain trade networks without requiring formalized social hierarchies or visible ruling elites. Burial practices provide additional insight into social structure. Most interments are simple pit or brick-lined graves, with only minor variation in grave goods such as beads, pottery, or personal ornaments. The relatively uniform treatment of the dead suggests a cultural emphasis on equality, while small differences in offerings may reflect occupation, household status, or wealth. Notably, there is no evidence of royal tombs, monumental burial chambers, or elaborate funerary rituals, distinguishing the Indus Valley from Mesopotamia or Egypt. This absence reinforces the interpretation of governance and social organization as institutional rather than hierarchical, with authority embedded in functional roles rather than concentrated in a hereditary elite. Communal infrastructure also reflects social integration. Shared wells, street drainage systems, and public baths required cooperation among neighborhoods for maintenance and equitable access. Coordination of water supply, waste management, and storage facilities demonstrates that social cohesion depended on active participation in communal responsibilities. Civic norms likely emerged through routine collaboration rather than enforced decrees, establishing predictability in daily life and reducing potential conflict. These practices suggest that the Indus people relied on procedural rules and social expectations to regulate behavior, enabling urban centers to function efficiently across large populations. The distribution and layout of neighborhoods further illustrate the interplay between social organization and economic function. Residential blocks were typically aligned with main streets, while specialized craft areas were positioned for accessibility and resource transport. Proximity to marketplaces, granaries, and administrative structures provided households with opportunities to participate in trade and civic oversight. This spatial configuration reinforced interdependence, creating microcosms of urban life in which domestic, economic, and civic responsibilities were interconnected. Such organization maintained stability even in the absence of a centralized ruling figure, illustrating how procedural governance and community cooperation can sustain complex societies. Children and youth likely participated in household and craft activities, contributing to skill transmission and social continuity. Terracotta toys, miniature tools, and apprenticeship evidence suggest that practical knowledge, trade skills, and civic awareness were imparted early. Integration of younger generations into productive routines ensured that labor, craft knowledge, and social norms persisted across generations. Household participation in education and economic activity thus reinforced both family cohesion and neighborhood interdependence. Overall, the social organization of the Indus Valley Civilization combined functional stratification with communal cohesion. Households operated as economic and social units within broader urban networks, while specialized labor and occupational clusters allowed cities to maintain trade, production, and civic infrastructure. Minimal material differences in housing and burial practices reflect a deliberate cultural emphasis on equality, tempered by pragmatic distinctions based on occupation and responsibility. This societal model facilitated urban efficiency, sustained population growth, and supported the decentralized governance system described in the previous section. This understanding of households, neighborhoods, and occupational integration provides context for the cultural and ritual practices that unified the Indus communities. Social organization created the framework within which religious observances, symbolic motifs, and communal activities were conducted, linking daily life to collective identity. The subsequent section will examine how religion, ritual, and shared cultural practices were embedded within the social and civic fabric of the civilization. Religious life in the Indus Valley Civilization appears to have been integrated into daily routines and communal spaces rather than centered on monumental temples or elite priesthoods. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, Kalibangan, and Dhalavira reveals terracotta figurines, fire altars, ritual bathing platforms, and standardized motifs on seals, suggesting a system of shared beliefs and practices. Among these artifacts are figurines that may represent fertility deities, mother goddesses, or proto-Shiva figures, as indicated by horned headdresses and yogic postures. While interpretations remain cautious due to the absence of textual explanation, the recurrence of specific motifs across a wide geographic area suggests cultural continuity and common religious concepts. These practices likely reinforced social cohesion, providing communities with shared symbols and rituals that bridged residential neighborhoods and economic quarters. Ritual bathing and water-related practices appear to have held both religious and practical significance. The Great Bath at Mohenjo-daro, with its watertight brick construction, steps, and surrounding galleries, indicates organized communal use. Other sites, including Kalibangan and Dhalavira, exhibit bathing platforms and wells that may have served both hygienic and ceremonial purposes. Fire altars found in Kalibangan provide evidence for ritual fire use, possibly associated with offerings or purification rites. These installations are comparatively modest in scale, reinforcing the interpretation that religious activity was participatory, community-focused, and closely connected to daily life rather than controlled by a centralized priestly hierarchy. Symbolic motifs on seals, pottery, and household objects provide further insight into shared cultural practices. Recurrent depictions of animals, such as elephants, unicorn-like creatures, bulls, and humped zebu, may have had ritual or symbolic significance, potentially representing fertility, strength, or protection. Geometric and abstract patterns are also frequent, suggesting symbolic communication or codified iconography understood across multiple settlements. The consistency of these motifs across hundreds of kilometers illustrates the cultural integration of the Indus people, allowing dispersed urban and rural populations to maintain a coherent visual and ritual vocabulary. These shared symbols functioned as a cultural glue, linking economic, residential, and civic life. Communal ritual likely reinforced the social norms embedded in urban governance and neighborhood organization. The alignment of public baths, altars, and ceremonial spaces with residential grids demonstrates that religion was interwoven with urban planning. Participation in shared rituals may have served to coordinate community efforts, reinforce adherence to civic expectations, and cultivate collective identity. This approach differs from civilizations reliant on centralized religious authority, emphasizing practice over monumental display or individual devotion. Such integration helped maintain the coherence of the Indus system, supporting collaboration in trade, craft production, and civic management. The study of religious and cultural practices in the Indus Valley underscores the civilization's emphasis on social integration and shared identity. Through modest communal structures, repeated symbolic motifs, and standardized ritual forms, the Indus people created a unifying cultural framework that connected households, neighborhoods, and cities. These practices complemented governance structures and social organization, reinforcing urban cohesion and facilitating complex economic networks. Understanding this cultural dimension provides context for examining the environmental foundations of the civilization, including agricultural systems and water management, which sustained both daily life and ceremonial practices in subsequent centuries. The Indus Valley Civilization's urban and economic achievements were fundamentally tied to its environmental context, particularly the river systems that traverse the region. The Indus River and its tributaries, along with the Ghaggar-Hakra system, provided fertile floodplains that supported sustained agricultural production. These rivers exhibited predictable seasonal flooding, which replenished nutrient-rich alluvial soils and allowed communities to cultivate wheat, barley, pulses, and cotton over extensive areas. Settlements were strategically located near these watercourses, balancing access to irrigation with protection from inundation. Archaeological survey and sediment analysis suggest that Indus farmers understood local hydrology, aligning field systems, storage facilities, and urban layouts to maximize productivity and reduce vulnerability to seasonal fluctuations. The combination of fertile land, reliable water supply, and organized agricultural practices enabled population growth, the emergence of urban centers, and surplus generation for trade. Agricultural specialization varied according to local environmental conditions. In the floodplains of the Indus and Ravi rivers, cereal crops predominated, while more arid regions relied on drought-tolerant pulses and millets. Cotton, an indigenous crop, was cultivated for both domestic use and trade, representing one of the earliest examples of fiber production in a major civilization. Archaeobotanical remains recovered from Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, and Lothal indicate systematic field rotation and crop management practices, suggesting a sophisticated understanding of agricultural cycles. These practices minimized the risk of soil depletion and maintained long-term productivity. The placement of granaries within urban centers highlights the importance of surplus storage, ensuring food security across seasons and supporting urban populations even during periods of environmental stress. Flood management played a crucial role in sustaining settlements. Elevated platforms, citadels, and well-engineered drainage systems protected urban areas from seasonal inundation while allowing fields to benefit from nutrient deposition. The organization of canals and embankments, as seen at Kalibangan and Dhalavira, indicates intentional manipulation of water flow for agricultural advantage. These structures, while modest compared to later large-scale irrigation projects, exemplify early hydraulic knowledge and community coordination. The balance between utilizing riverine resources and mitigating flood risk demonstrates that Indus communities approached agriculture with both ecological awareness and technical competence. The rivers also facilitated connectivity between regions, enabling the movement of goods, people, and ideas. Boats and rafts likely navigated navigable stretches, allowing agricultural surplus to be exchanged for raw materials, craft inputs, and luxury items from distant territories. Archaeological finds of exotic materials, such as semi-precious stones and metals, in urban centers indicate that rivers functioned as critical arteries for internal and interregional trade. The integration of agriculture and transport infrastructure demonstrates that economic, social, and environmental systems were mutually reinforcing, providing the foundation for complex urban development. Evidence of agricultural intensification includes tools such as sickles, plowshares, and storage bins, which reflect both labor organization and technological adaptation. The widespread presence of granaries and standardized storage facilities indicates that surplus was not merely produced but actively managed, contributing to urban planning, population stability, and trade readiness. These innovations allowed Indus communities to buffer against local environmental variability and to maintain a high degree of self-sufficiency. By organizing labor and infrastructure around productive floodplains, the civilization transformed environmental constraints into long-term economic advantage. Understanding river systems and agricultural productivity is essential to evaluating the resilience of the Indus Valley Civilization. Stable yields enabled craft specialization, trade, urban growth, and complex social organization, while also underpinning communal and ritual practices. The interaction between natural resources and human ingenuity provided both immediate sustenance and long-term strategic capacity. However, as subsequent environmental shifts would demonstrate, reliance on riverine cycles also created vulnerabilities, particularly when monsoon patterns weakened or rivers changed course. These dynamics set the stage for the hydraulic innovations discussed in the next section, where reservoirs, wells, and irrigation infrastructure further stabilized food production and urban life. Water management was central to the stability and prosperity of the Indus Valley Civilization. Archaeological evidence demonstrates a sophisticated approach to securing, storing, and distributing water in both urban and rural contexts. Nearly every household in Mohenjo-daro and Harappa contained private wells, while larger communal reservoirs and bathing platforms indicate organized public infrastructure. At Dalavira, the construction of massive water storage tanks, step wells, and channels reflects a deliberate strategy to capture and retain monsoon rainfall in an otherwise semi-arid region. These systems provided reliable water for drinking, sanitation, agriculture, and ritual use, illustrating the civilization's capacity to adapt to seasonal variability and environmental challenges. Urban settlements were carefully planned to optimize water distribution and drainage. Streets were aligned to facilitate runoff toward covered drains, while wells were strategically located to serve multiple households. Public baths, such as the Great Bath at Mohenjo-daro, suggest ceremonial or communal functions, yet they also demonstrate precise engineering to maintain water quality and prevent contamination. Reservoirs and step wells at Dalavira were constructed with impermeable stone and brick layers, enabling long-term water storage. This engineering indicates both technical knowledge and coordinated labor organization, reflecting the importance placed on water access for social, economic, and religious activities. Irrigation infrastructure, while not as extensive as later civilizations, was adapted to local hydrology and topography. Canals and channels connected minor settlements to nearby fields, allowing controlled flooding and improved crop yields. Archaeobotanical analysis shows that wheat, barley, and pulses were cultivated using moisture-conserving techniques, likely supported by these localized irrigation systems. The integration of irrigation with urban planning enabled the Indus people to sustain dense populations, even in regions with variable rainfall. By managing water at multiple scales, household wells, community reservoirs, and agricultural canals, the civilization maintained both resilience and productivity. The standardized construction of wells and water storage systems also reflects social coordination and shared knowledge. Brick-lined wells and reservoirs followed consistent dimensions, suggesting regulation or guidelines maintained across settlements. Such uniformity ensured compatibility with household and urban layouts and facilitated maintenance. Communities likely organized labor for construction and repair through cooperative arrangements, reinforcing social cohesion while meeting essential infrastructure needs. The repeated investment in water management underscores the centrality of this resource to the civilization's long-term viability. Water management extended beyond practical concerns to economic and civic organization. Reliable water access supported craft production, urban hygiene, and trade activities by stabilizing populations and reducing health risks. Granaries and marketplaces depended on water for processing food, maintaining livestock, and sustaining labor forces. Moreover, well-engineered systems enhanced the credibility of settlements as trade hubs, ensuring that merchants and artisans could operate efficiently. The combination of practical engineering, communal coordination, and civic planning highlights the civilization's sophisticated approach to integrating natural resources with social and economic structures. By implementing diverse water management strategies, the Indus Valley Civilization mitigated environmental risks while enhancing agricultural output, urban health, and economic stability. Reservoirs, wells, and irrigation infrastructure exemplify the civilization's capacity for long-term planning, technical skill, and cooperative labor. These developments were instrumental in maintaining urban populations, supporting craft specialization, and sustaining trade networks. However, as subsequent climatic shifts would demonstrate, even these systems could be challenged by prolonged drought or altered river courses, leading to adaptive strategies explored in the next section, which examines climate change and environmental stress and their impacts on the civilization's trajectory. By the late 3rd millennium BCE, the Indus Valley Civilization faced gradual environmental pressures that affected agricultural productivity, settlement stability, and urban planning. Paleoclimatic studies, including sediment cores, isotopic analysis, and pollen data indicate a weakening of the monsoon system after approximately 2000 BCE. Reduced rainfall led to lower river flow, altered flood cycles, and shrinking alluvial deposits, which directly impacted crop yields and the availability of fresh water. Archaeological evidence shows that some previously fertile areas became marginal for cultivation, prompting communities to relocate or adapt their agricultural practices. These changes demonstrate that the civilization's prosperity, though long sustained by riverine systems, was inherently vulnerable to climatic fluctuations. River dynamics further contributed to environmental stress. The Gagar-Hakra system, once supporting dense settlement clusters, gradually diminished, likely due to shifts in monsoon intensity and tectonic influences affecting river channels. Settlements along these rivers show evidence of abandonment or population decline, while remaining communities increasingly relied on smaller tributaries, wells, and reservoirs. Flood patterns became less predictable, reducing the reliability of traditional agricultural cycles. This variability would have necessitated adaptive strategies, including diversified crop selection, flexible land use, and localized irrigation systems, illustrating the Indus people's capacity to respond to environmental constraints without collapsing immediately. These environmental pressures coincided with economic and social shifts. Urban centers such as Mohenjo-daro and Harappa experienced gradual depopulation, and the standardization of bricks, weights, and seals began to diminish. Evidence suggests that the cohesion of centralized urban infrastructure was challenged as resources became scarcer and populations decentralized. Nevertheless, cultural continuity persisted, with pottery styles, craft techniques, and symbolic motifs maintained in smaller, rural communities. This adaptive response highlights that environmental stress did not trigger sudden societal collapse, but instead initiated a period of transformation, decentralization, and regional diversification. Understanding these environmental dynamics is essential for interpreting the subsequent evolution of the Indus civilization. The interplay between riverine dependence, monsoon variability, and human adaptation illustrates the delicate balance sustaining Bronze Age urban societies. By examining climatic stress alongside infrastructural innovations, it becomes clear that the Indus people maintained resilience for centuries, mitigating risks through water management, settlement relocation, and agricultural adjustment. These strategies provided continuity in social, economic, and cultural life, even as urban density and standardization gradually declined. The environmental challenges of this period set the stage for the urban reorganization and societal transformations discussed in the following chapter. Declining agricultural stability, coupled with shifting population patterns, contributed to changes in craft production, trade networks, and neighborhood cohesion, providing the context for the signs of stress and reconfiguration explored in Chapter 7. By around 2000 to 1900 BCE, the Indus Valley Civilization began to exhibit subtle but measurable signs of urban decline, reflected primarily in city planning and material culture. Archaeological layers from Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, and Dhalavira revealed changes in construction techniques, reduced adherence to standardized brick dimensions, and a decline in precision-engineered streets and drainage systems. Previously uniform baked brick sizes and organized street grids became inconsistent, indicating a gradual erosion of centralized oversight or collective coordination. This decline in urban planning did not occur suddenly, but appears to have developed over several generations, suggesting a slow adaptation to shifting environmental, economic, and social conditions. Craft production, once characterized by highly standardized techniques and uniform quality, also experienced decline. Workshops for bead-making, metallurgy, pottery, and shell carving show evidence of reduced consistency in both form and material selection. Standardized weights and seals, essential for regulating trade and ensuring equitable exchange, began to vary across regions. The reduction in standardization implies that the regulatory mechanisms maintaining cohesion across the civilization's extensive urban network were weakening. Yet, production did not cease entirely. Rather, artisans adapted to local resources, smaller markets, and decreased population density. This transition illustrates the capacity for communities to maintain functional economies even as large-scale coordination faltered. The decline in urban infrastructure and craft standardization reflects broader systemic pressures. Environmental stressors, including weakening monsoons and altered river courses, disrupted agricultural productivity, reducing surplus availability for urban centers. Trade networks were increasingly constrained, diminishing access to critical materials such as metals, timber, and semi-precious stones. As resource flows became less predictable, centralized planning of cities and crafts became more challenging. Communities responded by prioritizing local needs, adapting construction methods, and modifying production practices to suit available resources. This adaptive behavior demonstrates both resilience and flexibility, even in the face of declining urban uniformity. Importantly, these changes were gradual and regionally variable. Some settlements maintained higher levels of planning and standardization longer than others, suggesting that local leadership, resource availability, and environmental conditions influenced the pace of decline. Archaeologists note that smaller towns and emerging rural clusters retained functional urban characteristics while shedding the complexity of larger centers. This uneven transformation underscores the decentralized nature of the Indus civilization and its reliance on functional networks rather than absolute central authority. Understanding the decline of urban planning and craft standardization provides insight into the mechanisms of societal transformation. It illustrates how environmental, economic, and demographic pressures intersected to challenge urban cohesion, yet also highlights the civilization's capacity for adaptation. Rather than abrupt collapse, the Indus Valley experienced a gradual reorganization that redistributed populations, decentralized economic activity, and laid the groundwork for new regional cultural expressions. The weakening of standardized production and urban cohesion set the stage for demographic shifts and the depopulation of major cities, which is explored in the following section. As urban centers shrank and smaller settlements emerged, social and economic networks adjusted, shaping the subsequent phase of regional dispersion and transformation. By 1900 BCE, the Indus Valley Civilization entered a phase marked by gradual depopulation of its major urban centers. Cities such as Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, and Dhalavira experienced declining populations, evident from reduced residential density, abandoned public buildings, and shrinking urban footprints. Archaeological evidence suggests that this process was gradual rather than catastrophic. Houses and streets once meticulously maintained became less uniform, public baths and granaries fell into disrepair, and large-scale infrastructure projects were largely discontinued. The decline reflects a combination of environmental pressures, including weakened monsoon patterns and shifting river courses, along with economic and social factors that reduced the viability of dense urban life. The population movement was not limited to complete abandonment. Many residents migrated to smaller towns, rural villages, or newly emerging settlement clusters, creating a more dispersed habitation pattern across the Indus region. Archaeological surveys indicate that previously marginal areas saw increased occupation as smaller communities adopted subsistence strategies suited to local conditions. The spatial redistribution of populations allowed for continued agriculture, craft production, and trade on a local scale, even as the interconnected urban networks diminished. This regional dispersal illustrates the adaptive capacity of Indus societies, maintaining cultural continuity while responding to environmental and economic stress. Changes in material culture accompany these demographic shifts. Pottery styles evolved locally, weights and measures became less standardized, and urban infrastructure simplified. While these changes indicate a reduction in centralized oversight, they also reveal regional adaptation, with communities tailoring craft production, storage, and domestic practices to immediate needs. The continuity of certain Harappan traditions, such as bead-making and terracotta figurine production, highlights that while urban life contracted, cultural knowledge persisted within these new settlement patterns. These adaptations allowed populations to survive without the high-density urban framework that had characterized earlier periods. The depopulation of major cities also affected social organization and governance. Neighborhood councils and civic coordination in smaller settlements likely replaced the more extensive urban administrative structures of the mature Harappan phase. Public infrastructure, including wells, drainage systems, and granaries, became localized, reflecting smaller community sizes and reduced population density. Such decentralization may have facilitated quicker decision-making and more immediate responses to environmental and economic challenges, allowing dispersed populations to maintain relative stability. Regional dispersal also had economic implications. Long-distance trade diminished as urban hubs weakened, leading communities to rely more heavily on local exchange networks and self-sufficient production. Craft specialization continued but became more localized, with artisans serving nearby populations rather than trans-regional markets. This shift underscores the interdependence between population distribution, economic networks, and urban infrastructure. The decentralization of population and production was a strategic adaptation that preserved social and economic function despite the decline of major cities. Overall, the depopulation of major urban centers and the subsequent regional dispersal demonstrate a controlled, adaptive response to environmental and societal pressures. Rather than sudden collapse, the Indus civilization experienced a slow, regionally differentiated transformation that maintained cultural traditions and allowed survival through changing circumstances. These patterns of settlement and adaptation provide the context for understanding continuity and cultural change in the late Harappan period, examined in the next section. Despite the depopulation of major cities and the decline of centralized urban infrastructure, many cultural elements of the Indus Valley Civilization persisted into the late Harappan period. Archaeological evidence shows continuity in pottery forms, bead-making techniques, terracotta figurines, and seal motifs, even as production centers became smaller and more dispersed. These continuities suggest that the civilization maintained a shared cultural framework that extended across settlements, providing cohesion among increasingly independent communities. At the same time, new regional variations emerged, reflecting adaptation to local environmental conditions and resource availability. This combination of persistence and innovation illustrates the civilization's ability to evolve while retaining key aspects of its identity. Pottery in the late Harappan period demonstrates both continuity and change. Traditional red and buff wares remained prevalent, but new forms and decorative motifs appear in certain regions, indicating local experimentation and adaptation. Bead-making and shell ornament production continued, though often on a smaller scale, suggesting the survival of craft knowledge within households and localized workshops. Terracotta figurines, including depictions of animals and symbolic motifs, persisted, providing evidence for ongoing religious or cultural practices. These material continuities highlight that while the scale of production and urban coordination decreased, essential aspects of Harappan cultural identity remained intact. Settlement patterns also reflect a balance of continuity and transformation. Smaller towns and rural villages maintained Indus architectural principles, such as organized streets, brick construction, and household water management, though on a reduced scale. This indicates that knowledge of urban planning and domestic infrastructure persisted, even outside major urban centers. At the same time, localized adaptations emerged to respond to environmental constraints, such as shifting river courses and changing rainfall patterns. The persistence of these practices underscores the resilience of social and cultural systems, even amid declining urbanization. The late Harappan period also shows continuity in symbolic and ritual practices. Seal motifs, often depicting animals or geometric patterns, remained in use for trade, administrative, and possibly ritual purposes. Ritual or symbolic continuity extended to domestic life, with shared practices such as household altars and bathing areas reflecting enduring cultural norms. These practices helped reinforce social cohesion and identity within dispersed communities, maintaining a sense of continuity across both geography and time. Overall, the late Harappan period illustrates a civilization adapting to demographic and environmental changes without losing its cultural foundation. Material, architectural, and symbolic practices persisted alongside localized innovation, demonstrating resilience and flexibility. This combination of continuity and transformation laid the groundwork for subsequent cultural developments and interactions with incoming groups, including Indo-Iranian and Indo-Aryan populations, which are explored in Chapter 8. As the late Harappan period unfolded, archaeological evidence indicates emerging interactions between Indus communities and migrating Indo-Iranian and Indo-Aryan groups from the northwest. Excavations across the northern and northwestern peripheries of the Indus Valley reveal material exchanges, burial practices, and settlement patterns suggesting slow and sustained contact rather than sudden invasion. Sites such as Cemetery H in Punjab and adjacent regions show hybridized pottery styles, altered settlement layouts, and evidence of pastoralist practices, reflecting cultural blending. These interactions were facilitated by geographic proximity to the Indus floodplains and riverine routes that allowed mobility and communication between communities over long distances. Burial practices provide one of the clearest indicators of interaction. Cemetery H sites, dating from approximately 1900 to 1500 BCE, display extended inhumation with grave goods, a departure from earlier Indus cremation or less formal burial traditions. These cemeteries contain both traditional Harappan objects, such as pottery and beads, and novel items associated with steppe pastoralist cultures. The co-occurrence of these artifacts suggests gradual integration of customs, illustrating how material culture can record both continuity and adaptation. This evidence challenges earlier models that portrayed Indo-Aryan arrivals as sudden and violent, instead highlighting processes of negotiated cultural interaction. Ceramic and craft evidence further supports interaction. Steppe-related ceramics, often featuring distinct shapes, firing techniques, or decorations, appear alongside locally produced Harappan wares. Tools, ornaments, and utilitarian objects reflect a blending of production methods, demonstrating knowledge transfer and technological adaptation. The presence of new livestock, particularly horses, in these contexts indicates the introduction of pastoral practices that complemented existing agricultural systems. These hybrid economies suggest that incoming groups contributed additional subsistence strategies, which were gradually assimilated by local communities. Settlement patterns also reflect interaction and adaptation. Sites along the Indus periphery show smaller, dispersed villages with combined Indus and steppe characteristics. Architectural layouts incorporate elements of Harappan planning alongside features typical of pastoralist mobility. This hybrid settlement morphology reflects both the resilience of Indus cultural traditions and the influence of new populations adapting to local environmental conditions. The archaeological record suggests coexistence, trade, and selective adoption of practices rather than outright replacement. Understanding these interactions is essential to contextualizing the later emergence of early Vedic cultural landscapes. The blending of Indus and steppe traditions provided a foundation for evolving social, technological, and ritual practices that would shape the subcontinent's Bronze Age and early Iron Age developments. This evidence emphasizes the gradual and reciprocal nature of cultural change, demonstrating that transformation in this period was driven by negotiation, adaptation, and selective adoption rather than abrupt conquest. These archaeological patterns establish the framework for exploring technological exchanges, livestock introduction, and new cultural practices in Section 8.2. The combination of material evidence, burial practices, and settlement morphology demonstrates the nuanced ways in which Indus societies interacted with incoming steppe populations, setting the stage for long-term cultural evolution across the region. During the late Harappan period, interactions with incoming Indo-Iranian and Indo-Aryan groups facilitated the transfer of technologies, livestock, and cultural practices into the Indus region. Archaeological evidence shows the introduction of horses, previously absent in Harappan contexts, which became increasingly integrated into pastoralist and transport activities. The presence of horse remains in Cemetery H and peripheral settlements suggests that these animals were valued for mobility, herding, and possibly symbolic purposes. Their introduction represents a significant adaptation, as local communities combined existing agricultural practices with emerging pastoralist strategies. Technological exchanges are visible in pottery and tool assemblages. Steppe-influenced ceramics appear alongside traditional Harappan forms, reflecting new firing methods, shapes, and decorative techniques. Stone and copper tools also show hybridized forms, indicating selective adoption of steppe metallurgical knowledge. Bead making and ornament production continued, but artisans sometimes incorporated novel styles or motifs, demonstrating that craft traditions were adaptable rather than rigid. The blending of these technologies facilitated economic continuity while allowing experimentation with new materials and production methods. New cultural practices accompanied these technological and subsistence innovations. Burial rituals, domestic arrangements, and ceremonial objects incorporated elements from steppe traditions, though often combined with enduring Harappan practices. Pottery decoration, symbolic motifs, and ritual objects reveal continuity alongside incremental adaptation. These changes indicate that local populations were not passive recipients. Instead, they selectively adopted innovations that complemented existing systems. The hybridization of cultural practices helped stabilize communities during a period of demographic and environmental transition. Livestock management transformed regional economies. Sheep, goats, and cattle were supplemented by horses, introducing additional mobility and enabling diversified herding strategies. These animals allowed populations to exploit new ecological niches and maintain subsistence in areas less suitable for intensive agriculture. This integration of pastoral techniques alongside crop cultivation reflects a deliberate adaptation to changing environmental conditions and the decentralization of urban centers. Overall, the transfer of technologies, livestock, and cultural practices during the late Harappan period demonstrates a dynamic process of selective adaptation. Communities incorporated useful innovations while retaining core Harappan knowledge, sustaining social, economic, and ritual continuity. These developments set the foundation for emerging cultural patterns in the early Vedic period, including agricultural practices, settlement organization, and ritual traditions. The gradual blending of traditions illustrates that the Indus civilization's legacy extended beyond its urban centers, influencing subsequent societies through both material and cultural continuity. This technological and cultural synthesis provides the context for the slow transition toward early Vedic landscapes discussed in the next section, Section 8.3, where the enduring influence of Harappan traditions can be observed in the emerging subcontinental cultural framework. By the late Harappan period, the Indus Valley Civilization had entered a phase of transformation that laid the groundwork for early Vedic cultural landscapes. Archaeological evidence indicates that many Harappan practices persisted in modified forms, including agricultural techniques, settlement organization, craft traditions, and symbolic motifs. Small villages and regional settlements retained brick construction methods, standardized domestic layouts, and water management systems, reflecting continuity in practical knowledge. These enduring practices provided a stable foundation upon which emerging Indo-Aryan groups could introduce new cultural elements without entirely displacing existing traditions. Material culture illustrates the gradual blending of Harappan and steppe influences. Pottery, tool types, and decorative motifs show a hybridized character, combining continuity with localized innovation. While urban-scale craft standardization declined, artisanal skills persisted in domestic and community workshops, supporting subsistence and small-scale trade. Evidence of ritual continuity, including terracotta figurines and fire-related features, indicates that symbolic and religious practices also remained integral to daily life. This persistence demonstrates that the transition toward Vedic culture was evolutionary rather than revolutionary, with change occurring incrementally over generations. Settlement patterns further reinforce this gradual adaptation. Communities spread across smaller sites with dispersed populations, yet retained elements of Harappan planning such as street alignment, wall placement, and modular housing. The integration of steppe pastoralist practices, including horse management and mobile herding strategies, allowed populations to maintain economic resilience in the face of environmental variability. These adaptations illustrate a deliberate synthesis of old and new knowledge, producing hybrid landscapes that supported both agriculture and pastoralism. This slow transition also had implications for social and ritual organization. Early Vedic society reflects a mixture of existing Harappan norms and new steppe influences, with hierarchical differentiation beginning to emerge in response to pastoral and ritual systems. While material evidence does not provide complete insight into linguistic developments, settlement continuity and ritual patterns suggest that early Indo-Aryan groups absorbed and modified local cultural frameworks rather than replacing them wholesale. This process contributed to the long-term shaping of subcontinental civilization, preserving the legacy of the Indus Valley even as new traditions emerged. Understanding this period as a slow, negotiated transformation clarifies the relationship between late Harappan communities and early Vedic culture. Continuity in domestic life, agriculture, and symbolic practices demonstrates that Harappan knowledge persisted well beyond urban decline. At the same time, steppe-derived innovations facilitated adaptation to environmental stress, mobility, and evolving social structures. These developments set the stage for the final transformation of the region in Chapter 9, where urban traditions faded entirely and new local cultures emerged. By approximately 1500 BCE, the large urban centers of the Indus Valley Civilization had largely disappeared. Sites such as Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, and Dhalavira show clear signs of abandonment, with streets, public buildings, and drainage systems falling into disuse. The disappearance of these cities was gradual and regionally variable, reflecting a complex interplay of environmental, economic, and social factors rather than sudden catastrophe. River course changes, declining monsoon intensity, and soil degradation reduced agricultural yields, undermining the urban population base. As a result, dense urban living became increasingly unsustainable, prompting a shift toward smaller, dispersed settlements. Material culture provides further evidence of the end of urban traditions. Standardized bricks, once uniform across multiple cities, show variation in size and quality. Weights, seals, and other administrative tools gradually disappear from archaeological layers, signaling the breakdown of coordinated economic and bureaucratic systems. Urban workshops that produced beads, pottery, and ornaments on a large scale became less prominent, while craft production shifted to local, household-based systems. These changes illustrate the decline of centralized planning and the adaptation of communities to smaller, more self-sufficient living arrangements. The disappearance of writing is another hallmark of this transition. The undeciphered Indus script, previously used for administrative and economic purposes, ceases to appear after the urban phase. Its absence suggests that large-scale record-keeping and formalized administration were no longer necessary in a landscape dominated by smaller, autonomous communities. This shift highlights a transformation in the organization of society, as populations relied on oral communication, local memory, and community oversight to maintain cohesion and continuity. Despite the decline of urban systems, many aspects of Harappan life persisted in rural and semi-urban contexts. Agricultural practices, craft knowledge, and symbolic motifs endured, demonstrating cultural resilience. Communities adapted by prioritizing subsistence, localized trade, and manageable settlement sizes. This phase reflects a deliberate reorganization, where people retained essential knowledge while adjusting their social and economic structures to changing environmental and demographic conditions. Understanding the end of urban traditions clarifies the distinction between collapse and transformation. While cities disappeared, the human populations, skills, and cultural frameworks persisted, setting the stage for the emergence of regionalized post-Harappan cultures. The adaptive strategies developed during this period laid the foundation for new local identities and settlement patterns explored in the next section, Section 9.2, which examines the rise of these independent regional cultures across the former Indus region. Following the decline of large urban centers, the Indus region experienced a phase of regionalization marked by the emergence of multiple independent local cultures. Between 1500 and 1200 BCE, former Harappan territories gave rise to distinct cultural expressions such as the cemetery H culture in Punjab the ochre-colored pottery culture in eastern regions, and various other localized groups across Sindh and Gujarat. These communities adapted surviving Harappan knowledge to smaller-scale settlements, producing recognizable material continuity alongside regional innovations. Pottery styles, burial practices, and craft techniques evolved in response to local resources, environmental conditions, and demographic shifts, reflecting a decentralized cultural mosaic rather than a single dominant urban civilization. Archaeological evidence highlights the continuation of certain Harappan traits within these regional cultures. Brick construction, although simpler and less standardized, persisted in domestic and communal structures. Beadmaking, shell ornaments, and other artisanal practices continued at a local level, demonstrating the transmission of technical knowledge across generations. Burial customs retained aspects of Harappan ritual traditions, though with regional variations that reveal both adaptation and experimentation. The persistence of these elements illustrates how core cultural practices were maintained even as population centers became smaller and geographically dispersed. At the same time, new cultural forms emerged to address changing social and environmental circumstances. Pottery shapes, decorative patterns, and tools show local experimentation that deviated from earlier urban norms. These innovations reflect flexible responses to altered settlement structures, resource availability, and subsistence strategies. The development of localized administrative practices and trade networks, tailored to the needs of smaller populations, indicates that communities continued to organize themselves effectively without centralized authority. The coexistence of continuity and innovation underscores the resilience of human societies in adapting to new challenges. The regionalization of the Indus landscape also had implications for identity and cultural memory. Communities maintained elements of shared Harappan tradition, such as symbolic motifs and craft techniques, while developing distinct regional markers. This allowed populations to preserve a sense of continuity while simultaneously expressing localized identity, laying the groundwork for future cultural and linguistic developments in South Asia. Regional diversity became a defining feature of the post-urban Indus world, emphasizing adaptability and the capacity for innovation within historical continuity. Overall, the rise of new local cultures demonstrates how the collapse of urban centralization did not equate to the disappearance of Harappan influence. Instead, the civilization's knowledge, techniques, and symbolic systems were reconfigured within smaller, regionally distinct communities. This pattern of transformation establishes the framework for understanding what elements of Harappan society persisted and which were lost, explored in the subsequent section, Section 9.3. In the post-urban phase of the Indus Valley Civilization, certain cultural, technological, and social elements persisted even as others disappeared. Core practices such as agricultural techniques, craft production, and domestic architecture continued to shape daily life. Traditional crops like wheat, barley, and pulses remained staples, and knowledge of irrigation, while construction and floodplain management persisted in smaller settlements. Similarly, craft skills such as beadmaking, pottery production, and shell ornament crafting continued at a reduced scale, illustrating the resilience of artisanal knowledge despite the loss of centralized urban workshops. These surviving practices ensured continuity in economic and cultural life across the region. Symbolic and ritual practices also endured. Terracotta figurines, animal motifs, and domestic ritual spaces remained in use, reflecting shared cultural frameworks that transcended urban decline. Seal designs, while less standardized, continued to convey social or economic meaning within local communities. These elements highlight that, although the Indus script disappeared and large-scale administrative systems collapsed, the civilization's symbolic and technical knowledge was transmitted across generations. Continuity in these areas allowed the foundations of social organization, craft, and ritual to influence emerging regional cultures. At the same time, significant elements of the civilization faded. Large urban centers, with their standardized city planning, extensive drainage systems, and public granaries, ceased to function. The sophisticated system of weights and measures that regulated trans-regional trade largely disappeared. The Indus script, which had facilitated administrative coordination and possibly ritual communication, was no longer in use. Monumental civic infrastructure, centralized governance, and long-distance trade networks diminished, reflecting the loss of the coordinated complexity that had defined the mature Harappan phase. The pattern of survival and disappearance was uneven across regions. While core domestic and craft practices persisted, urban-centric innovations and elite-controlled technologies often vanished. Adaptation to environmental stressors and smaller population sizes drove this selective retention, emphasizing flexibility and resilience rather than total collapse. Communities retained useful knowledge while abandoning systems that required large, coordinated populations to sustain them. Understanding what survived and what faded clarifies the trajectory of the Indus civilization's legacy. By separating enduring practices from those lost, historians can trace the continuity of agricultural, craft, and symbolic knowledge into subsequent South Asian cultures. This analysis provides essential context for the final chapter on the civilization's rediscovery, long-term influence, and place in world history. The selective persistence of Harappan knowledge ensured that, even without cities or writing, the foundations of this Bronze Age civilization influenced the cultural and technological development of the region for millennia. The rediscovery of the Indus Valley Civilization began in the mid-19th century when early surveys by British colonial officials first documented mounds and ruins in present-day Pakistan and northwest India. Initial accounts, often focused on visible structures such as brick platforms and mound formations, did not immediately reveal the full extent of the civilization. Archaeologists such as Alexander Cunningham and later John Marshall played pivotal roles in identifying and excavating key sites, including Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. Systematic excavation techniques gradually replaced earlier, less methodical approaches, allowing scholars to document architectural layouts, artifact distributions, and urban planning features with increasing precision. Excavations revealed extensive evidence of advanced urbanization that challenged prior assumptions about ancient South Asia. Marshall's work in the 1920s confirmed the presence of grid-planned streets, sophisticated drainage systems, large granaries, and standardized brick construction. These discoveries demonstrated that the Indus Valley Civilization had developed complex urban centers comparable in scale and organization to contemporary Egypt and Mesopotamia. The systematic uncovering of thousands of artifacts, including pottery, seals, beads, and tools, provided material proof of highly developed craft, trade, and administrative systems. Early interpretations initially underestimated the civilization's significance. Scholars sometimes assumed it was a peripheral or derivative culture, largely because of its apparent lack of monumental palaces, temples, or written texts in decipherable form. Over time, however, the consistent urban layout, engineering sophistication, and standardized economic tools shifted scholarly understanding. Recognition of the civilization's scale and organization redefined South Asian prehistory and established it as one of the world's major Bronze Age cultures. The rediscovery process also highlighted methodological innovations in archaeology. Marshall and his contemporaries implemented careful stratigraphic excavation, artifact cataloging, and contextual analysis, providing a model for modern archaeological practice in the region. The identification of Harappan artifacts outside the main cities, such as at Latal and Dhalavira, revealed the civilization's regional extent and connectivity, expanding the understanding of its economic and cultural networks. These findings underscored that the Indus civilization had a widespread influence across the subcontinent, including trade contacts with distant regions. Modern reevaluation of the Indus Valley Civilization continues to refine its historical significance. Advances in remote sensing, satellite imagery, and geochemical analysis have uncovered previously unknown settlements and clarified river courses, settlement patterns, and environmental adaptations. The rediscovery phase, therefore, was not merely the unearthing of cities and artifacts, but a fundamental reorientation of global understanding regarding the complexity and sophistication of early urban societies in South Asia. This historical recovery establishes the context for evaluating the Indus civilization's long-term legacy and its enduring contributions to cultural, technological, and urban development. The evidence and insights gained through rediscovery set the foundation for exploring how Harappan knowledge and practices influenced later South Asian civilizations, discussed in Section 10.2 on civilizational legacy. The Indus Valley Civilization left a profound and enduring legacy across South Asia, influencing subsequent societies in multiple spheres. Urban planning principles, including grid-based layouts, standardized brick construction, and integrated drainage systems, persisted in varying forms in later settlements. Archaeological evidence suggests that smaller towns and village clusters maintained knowledge of water management, household organization, and communal infrastructure, demonstrating that the practical innovations of Harappan cities continued to shape daily life long after urban centers had disappeared. These principles contributed to the continuity of functional settlement design throughout the subcontinent. Craft and technological traditions also endured. Bead-making, pottery production, shell and copper ornamentation, and metallurgical skills were transmitted to succeeding cultures, often adapted to local conditions. Standardized measurement systems and weight practices, while largely diminished in scale, influenced regional trade networks and economic organization in post-Harappan societies. The persistence of these technical skills highlights the durability of Harappan knowledge, emphasizing that the civilization's influence was not confined to the lifespan of its urban centers. Agricultural practices remained another key element of the Indus legacy. Knowledge of crop rotation, floodplain cultivation, and water management supported continued subsistence farming in smaller, decentralized communities. Techniques such as well construction, irrigation channels, and seasonal planning were retained and adapted by successive generations, allowing populations to maintain productive land use in diverse environmental contexts. These continuities facilitated the transition to early Vedic societies while preserving critical aspects of Indus knowledge. Symbolic and cultural practices also contributed to the region's long-term heritage. Motifs found on seals, figurines, and pottery, including animals, geometric patterns, and ritual symbols, were echoed in later regional art and ritual traditions. Community-based religious practices, focused on domestic and local ritual rather than monumental temples, informed evolving social and spiritual organization. These elements demonstrate that cultural memory extended beyond the disappearance of cities, sustaining a recognizable Harappan influence within the broader cultural landscape. Overall, the civilization's legacy in South Asia reflects a combination of technological, agricultural, social, and symbolic continuity. The Indus Valley Civilization provided foundational knowledge and practices that successive societies could adapt to new environmental and social challenges. Its influence persisted not through replication of urban grandeur, but through practical, symbolic, and technological inheritance. Understanding this legacy clarifies the long-term impact of the Indus people, situating them as a formative and enduring force in South Asian history. The persistence of these foundational elements prepares the context for considering the Indus Valley's broader global significance, addressed in the final section, Section 10.3, which situates the civilization among the earliest and most innovative urban societies worldwide. The Indus Valley Civilization occupies a unique position among the world's earliest urban societies. Emerging contemporaneously with Egypt and Mesopotamia, it developed cities of comparable size and complexity, yet followed a distinct model of social, economic, and political organization. Unlike its contemporaries, the Indus civilization demonstrated decentralized governance, with no evidence of palaces, royal tombs, or monumental rulers. Its urban centers prioritized civic planning, sanitation, and standardization, reflecting a societal commitment to coordination and communal well-being rather than hierarchical display. Technological achievements further underscore the civilization's global significance. Sophisticated drainage systems, well-conceived urban layouts, and standardized weights and measures reveal advanced engineering, administrative skill, and economic integration. Trade networks extended both within the subcontinent and with distant regions such as Mesopotamia and the Persian Gulf, situating the Indus Valley within an early international commercial sphere. These accomplishments illustrate the civilization's ability to combine local innovation with participation in broader, trans-regional interactions. Culturally, the Indus Valley left enduring influences on craft, agriculture, and symbolic traditions, which persisted long after urban centers declined. Its emphasis on practical and civic systems, rather than monumentalism, offers an alternative model of early urban development. The civilization exemplifies a distinct path to social complexity, demonstrating that highly organized societies can flourish without centralized royal authority. In a global context, the Indus Valley stands as one of humanity's earliest examples of urban resilience, technological innovation, and cultural continuity. Its cities, craft traditions, agricultural systems, and symbolic frameworks contributed to the foundations of South Asian civilization, and its achievements continue to inform our understanding of alternative trajectories in human history. By examining the Indus model, scholars gain insight into diverse possibilities for early complex societies, highlighting its lasting significance alongside other major Bronze Age civilizations. This concludes the narrative arc of the Indus Valley Civilization, integrating origins, development, transformation, and legacy into a comprehensive understanding of one of the world's most innovative ancient societies.